All right, time to wrap this very, very long journey up. Again, audience, I think for once we can actually disclose a bit of behind the scenes stuff. This literally took like 6 months to be doing. You have actually been lucky in the way that you've seen.
And yet
And
somehow,
it
against
did
all
took me like
odds,
6 months to record it, so
fitting.
this actually took like 1/30 of my life. Make that what you want,
And
but let's not
yet,
dwindle too much on the past. And well, let me expand before starting. Let me expand a bit more on what I said in the previous part, specifically about the middle piece of Tetsuya Takashi's journey as in the Namco era. Just for few details. Like I said, after establishing Monolith, Takashi wanted the studio to be independent. However, it just so happens that back then there was the CEO of Namco, which, by the way, at that point had not been, merged with Bandai at that point. And like I said, that CEO wanted to expand the catalog. That's why we got a lot of Namco games back during the GameCube and PS2 era, like the Pac-Man World sequels, Tales of Symphonia, for example, the Tekken and Soul Calibur sequels with what they brought up, for example, the Dot Hack games, and Xenosaga. However, let me elaborate a bit more on that. That one was supposed to be 6 episodes, just like this game, but unfortunately they had to be condensed in 3, and even those had their own trouble development cycle. In one case, Tetsuya Takashi did not even wrote directly, but only conceptualized what one of the episodes was supposed to be. Unfortunately, I'm still a bit too distanced from this particular franchise to actually know more about it. So it's something that needs to be experienced directly. I still reiterate what I said, that the games need to be re-released in some kind of fashion. And again, Katsuya Arada, which the reason he campaigned for it is because apparently the Tekken offices were actually closer to the one on Monolith, and that's where we're basically drinking buddies. Kind of like how the director of Final Fantasy 14 and Akira Hino have been for the past couple of years.
I remember Teo. Arada has also been seen with Teo, and he was carrying a Jibayan plushie.
Yeah. But so I don't know. I've been told that the gameplay might feel a bit too clunky for this day and age. So I'm not sure if they deserve like a proper remaster, or just a simple HD conversion. But I do believe that the saga, this trilogy, has to be re-released in some kind of way. Among other projects, Monolith did also collaborate smallly a bit still with Square, but apparently by helping on Virtual Server also, which feels random as a project.
You know, that just seems
Jova,
fitting, honestly, all things considered, when
honestly,
you get down
Jova,
to it.
I don't really... Okay, it might be weird on its own, but I don't really have a problem with what the gameplay of Virtual Servers does.
No. I mean, look, I'm not going to act like Dirge of Service is a terrible game, but let's also not act like it was not a divisive as all hell game for a lot of reasons.
Let me put it this way. Let me throw my 2 cents. It's not a good game per se. However, I do kind of have a soft spot for it.
Let me put it like this. I consider Dirge of Cerberus like the Shadow the Hedgehog of the Final Fantasy VII franchise. It's not amazing, but it's not terrible either.
Anyway, after, like I said, towards the end of the GameCube era, again, the CEO had changed. If I recall correctly, retired in 2002, and then the merging with Bandai had happened. So things were restructuring a bit, and Takashi was meddling that things were not really going, particularly anywhere. He wanted to go independent again, but the person from Nintendo, which Desi did also help me find, which is called Shinji Atano, a producer who retired in 2013, but has produced a shit ton of Nintendo games, including the Mario Party franchise. We have to thank this guy for that, apparently. So he had apparently the good nose to actually, scout Takahashi. And at that point, Nintendo applied kind of a hostile takeover by purchasing a lot of shares of Monolith. So that's also why Batten Kaitos is still in an ambiguous situation, because if I recall correctly, still currently, Monolith, 80% of Monolith shares are owned by Nintendo and 16% by Namco. I don't know what the rest is for.
I just want to point out that Nintendo doesn't usually buy companies, so let that speak volumes.
Well, recently they did purchase, fully or entirely next level games. So it happens, but not in as common case like, say, the Embracer Group, which is stuff like THQ Nordic has been doing that in the past years all over the place. And apparently, minor trivia that I might reprise if we ever get to Xenoblade Chronicles. Originally, the part of the script was supposed to be cut a lot, actually, because Nintendo was actually fearing that the final product might have interfered with the hardware. So Takashi had to actually prepare several drafts of potential, final versions where cuts were taking place in different places and ask what might have been the more, feasible. However, instead, if I recall correctly, another one from either Monolith or Nintendo rejected outright Takashi's suggestion. Instead, managed to persuade Nintendo to keep supporting the project and allow the team to complete the work as envisioned. And that's how we got Xenoblade as it is today.
And that's not even getting into the whole Rainfall campaign, but that's another story.
Well, that was more out of the fans over, rather than behind the scenes for studios. But that's pretty much it concluding that. Again, anything else can be reprised if we ever tackle one of the other games that Monolith did. Next up, for the next surprise, yes, I'm pulling kind of like of attending Computer Whiz Kids. Okay, I originally wanted to give this video to you just for the lose, but I don't really need to because I actually checked it myself, so I can easily sum it up in 1 minute and give the link to the description. I don't know if in case you haven't know this channel or haven't seen Kadikro's video about it, there's a set of videos on YouTube that are actually collecting macro reviews from a show from the early 90s called all over the 90s called Flights of Fancy, which on YouTube are labeled as gaming in the Clinton years for some reason.
I've heard about that show before. Chris brought it up.
Directed by a certain George Wood, who doesn't really make a great job in reviewing games, and he has a video for this game. So I know what you're thinking if you know the source material. How can possibly someone like George Wood, one who as a pathological way of cheating his way through a game and not playing it through.
To the point where sometimes he literally docks a game points because he can't cheat it.
And not particularly caring about, potentially a game's, in-depth look because of how rapid fire it was. What can he potentially find from this? He actually raises some minor good points, like in saying that the way the dialogue, happens on screen is a bit too slow and needed to, and felt he was interrupted too much instead of actually flowing, more faster. So he actually raises some good point, and even praising the animation. For reference, he gives a score of B, B, and B. So relatively high for his standards. But then he basically, in his true fashion, he basically said, "We really enjoyed the initial FMV, so we're gonna showcase to you most of it." And the rest of the review, which is like 3 minutes, is most of the rest of the initial FMV. Beautiful.
Of course, the absolute should.
So that leaves me with 2 more things. The first, one small info that you will also be able to see, because one link that I will give in the description is The Perfect Works, translated, a collection of PDFs of the translated work called Perfect Works. Keep in mind, it's a fan translation, so it's a bit rough around the edges, but it's extremely informative. The question is, why haven't I given this before to you in any capacity? It spoils everything, pure and simple. And again, it's really informative, but imagine someone who has heard about this game, and comes to read that only to find out most of the plot twist spoiled. It really ruins a bit the surprises.
Does it give a spoiler warning at least?
Okay, I forgot because I haven't checked the early pages. But it can be shown beginning. But it really is informative. What I'm posting right now, and you audience will be able to see on the video itself, is not really in it, but it's Takashi's original envision in how to structure the 6th episode of Xenogears, instead of how they had to be condensed into it.
Wow, the majority of it was episode 5. That explains a lot.
Well, episode 5, like I said, is all about, freeing ourselves from Deus and all that shit. But there are also two specific bits from the Perfect Wars that I want to talk about before moving to the main plate of today before the final thoughts. One is about the Fatima family, and I think I might have underestimated seriously, what with this game might have been more legit than I thought, because pairing the genealogic tree, the family tree of Fatima contains more, inbreeding than the Habsburg than I actually originally thought. So no. Margie and Bart's wedding is even more creepy. It's actually officially endorsed in being creepy.
The Alabama is strong. The Alabama is strong, I see.
The thing is that, again, originally it was meant to... If it was meant to be just because of political reasons, it honestly makes sense even with the setting, because, as a parallel to actual nobility from Europe and everything. But then the game pulls that kind of tease in saying that they do have an infatuation for each other. So,
and there's also the concept art, which shows them seriously giving each other the goo-goo eyes during their grand wedding.
So, but again, I get the idea also that by the end of the game, this kind of thing is probably the least thing they have to worry about, but still, pushing a bit too much the envelope, potentially. But the other thing from Perfect War I want to share about, the complete functioning of the Zohar system. Again, this has been only described in theory, and there's a long and tedious scientific explanation of how it works. They actually applied technobabble on it. As the idea strictly behind it is that the wave existence inside the Zohar perceives the elements that are in contact with them, and thanks to their power, manipulates the environment, not people, just the environment, in order to favor the beings that are in contact with them. One example is in gear battles, because remember, all gears are connected via what they call a slave generator. And thanks to the ether powers, which allows character traditional shonen style of, I'm in a difficult spot, I find the will to actually, put up. This is showcased with a small comic strip style of the comic, where Faye is put in a situation similar to that. The second one is apparently against Rankar and the Gamer Goobers. That's cute in a punch-out situation. And that's it's fine and dandy. Much less the second one. Mind you, I have to warn you right now, it's not a situation that happens properly in-game. It's only a theoretical example that just happens to use characters that are involved. It's about a what if scenario where Faye, when was in contact with the Zohar, is in love with Ellie. And, as he puts himself, if I can get her, great, he thinks. If the Zohar is in contact, we calculate the abilities and calculate the possibility of different scenarios, kind of like Doctor Strange in Infinity War, finds the scenario that may allow Ellie and Faye to meet successfully and successfully develop a love story, and manipulates, I have to stress again, the events, the events and not the people, until the correct path is actually forged.
That's a funny comic, I guess.
It is funny. And thankfully, it doesn't veer out of mind control, but it is still a tad creepy in a sense that how railroaded, love story is forced upon someone just if they're in contact. Again, thankfully, this is not how it happens in the game.
I'm curious,
thank God
actually.
about that.
Are these comics supposed to be merely parodies, or are these concepts for how things might have turned out?
No. Mere, not necessarily parodies, but comedic examples of a concept that gets explained as a definition of a thing. In this case, how the Zohar works. Again, like I said, this is posing an hypothetical scenario where Faye has been in contact to fall through with the Zohar, which, as we do know, it's not the case, because between defragmenting of his personality and how broken the reincarnation process was, Faye was never in contact fully with the Zohar until the very end of the game, and even then, there's the fact that Deus has been in contact for most of the time. So that also explains why a lot of things managed to enter from Yan's way, including her managing to successfully screw up with Faye and Ellie meeting again, only for their love story to not working or ending in misery until
it's
the
funny.
very end.
One would almost think that Deus and Zohar are two halves of a god or something at this point.
Well, that's the misconception that in-universe is formed. When Faye meets the Wave Existence is more of an unfortunate case where, Deus just tapped into it. But we have dwindled too much enough, so let's get into the main plate. The segment that I like to call The Life and Time of One Dr. Chitan Uzuki.
Oh boy!
Again, the Dark Kid was so generous that he did put an entire section at the end of his playthrough, text LP, into basically compiling all the stuff that Chitan did in-game and that he stalled in perfect works. Because, like he said, one thing that was sadly cut away was the backstory. I will have to fill in some minor gaps because even the Dark Kid did not put everything in it, but I do believe one or two things need to be pointed out that are actually I'm mentioning perfect works, so you can check on that too. So let's begin, shall we? As he himself mentioned, Chitan was born in the third-class citizen levels of Solaris. Apparently, his father and mother were land dwellers who just picked up, as usual, from Solaris. Quite an extensive family to boot. He even had 8 brothers to boot. Unfortunately, at 13 years old, apparently a toxic experiment in the soil system causes an epidemic that spreads through the entire levels of Solaris, these small levels of lower level Solaris, killing hundreds, including Chitan's entire family.
Because of course.
It is widely thought that Chitan was behind this as he was going all Dexter's lab in his parents' basement at the time.
Chitan!
It's nothing that actually outright confirms it, but the way it's phrased, particularly connected to his backstory, at least wants to wink it and said, yeah, this might have actually been his fault. Especially because there is a parallel to Faye's original accident, as in, right after this, Chitan gets ostracized from everyone who survived in the third-class sector due to what happened, and the only reason he didn't die in poverty is because Ramsus actually saw potentially instead sponsored him to enter Jugend. And we do know how that friendship and with Sigurd and Chitan basically fleeing out of his nose. This in turn allowed Chitan to get in contact thanks to his abilities also with the Emperor Cain, which in turn also allowed him to know a lot of the secrets that normally the personnel of Solaris would not know. That is why he knows all that kind of thing. And as such, he also developed the following weapons in the meantime: Wyvern, Ramsus' first gear; Alcanshell, Bishop Stone's gear; the Buntline, as we mentioned, the pilot shooting cannon; the gravity gun of Akzen; the arrows for Virge; and the combining mechs of the elements.
Of course you did.
Chitan is very talented, but he said he was working for the wrong people. But here's how it gets better. Because of his, distinguishing out of Jugend Academy, he was actually led to be the commander of our operation against one of the many wars that Solaris had against Shevat. And in this case, Chitan was actually this close to actually make Solaris win. Why did he not? He tried a solo mission once during the night, fought to a standstill with both Gaspar, the guy with the pointy nose that we've seen removing the limiters, and his daughter Yui. Chitan was very impressed by both Yuri's skills and beauty, and decided to pull his forces back so he could court her later on.
Wow!
What?
So you're telling me Chitan literally threw away his side's victory
because he popped a boner for the daughter of a leader of Shevat.
That's kind of a running theme in this story, honestly. People go crazy over pussy in this.
Again, I find it more hilarious that Solaris would have been so close in actually conquering Shevat if it wasn't for this. But basically,
he gave it all up for sex.
But basically, that's just the premise. Once Emperor Kane gets to know about Faye's location, he plants the ordered Citan to be planted in near the vicinity of Lahan, so that he can actually, scout on him. And this leads us to the events of the game. So let's start with everything that is wrong about this. One, as I mentioned, he serves as the only doctor in the village, but lives miles outside of town, on top of a mountain, past a wolf-infested trail with a broken bridge that has been washed out for at least a week before the events of the game.
Asshole!
He sees that Faye is about to go berserk during the accident and nuke the town, so he gets to grab Dan, just because he happened to be standing still next to him all the time, and books it to safety with the children and elderly. Doesn't bother telling anyone nearby to get the hell out of Dodge.
What's your excuse there, Cheetah?
And as I mentioned, by the way, during all of this, his daughter Midori, which I mentioned was psychic, knew along all of it about the fact that Faye was a walking D&D, and she was probably scared shitless every time her father invited Faye over to devour all the food in their house.
Like, I'll give Midori credit, nobody probably would have believed the little girl who claimed to be a psychic, okay, but still, though... Dang, Cheetah! Talk about dropping the ball on that one. Unless that was all part of the plan.
Well, I'm not sure, because next Faye wakes up after the land disaster and Cheetah immediately tells him to fuck off in the woods or something, since everyone is pissed he blew the bridge and killed half the town. He also doesn't seem to care much about Dan runs off into the wilderness by himself, and despite there clearly being multiple injured people from the blast, Cheetah fucks off immediately later that day. He gets his wife to call Shevat to go pick everybody up or something, but seeing as if it's Shevat, they probably didn't lose you over there for at least a week. And if I might add, like I said, he didn't really consider Faye to be actually picked up by Shevat, instead threw him into Yemeni territory so Swaz could have actually picked it up. I get the idea that he might have do that in order to keep up the facade, in order to convince Swaz that yes, I'm pushing Faye towards you so we can get it or something. But come on. Despite Faye feeling like a total monster for jumping a giant robot in Yuki Lahan, Cheetah sees it fit to go home and repair his landcraft to transport Veltal to Fain to pirate again, conveniently waits until disaster is struck in the form of him being attacked by a goddamn dinosaur before doing so, proceeds to vanish until the fight concludes, despite the landcraft having miniguns equipped on it. We have seen it, Mason trying to use them, which might have been useful. Then, because of probably what I said before, also tells Ellie to fuck off during the same night at the bonfire. Then, in Dazil, rents a dune buggy to go raid a gear excavation site for some parts to repair Veltal, while leaving Faye behind to go hit the bar or something. Repairs Veltal off screen and almost definitely never returns the rental buggy. Then he pretty much steals, a lot later, he pretty much steals Heimdall from the Desert Pirates and probably discards in the middle of the woods whenever he upgrades it to the Omni-Gear. Well, to be fair, we have seen it, but he kind of reverts to that once the Omni-Gears gets eaten up by Deus, so who knows on that. In Bledavik, in order to rescue Margie, he comes up with a plan where Faye enters a fighting tournament while Bart swims upstream through the city water supply's channels, while Cheetah, quote-unquote, works the crowd towards attention. To draw attention towards Faye's antics and away from Bart. Proceeds to do fuck all and vanish throughout all the duration of the rescue. We know later that he apparently manipulated the scenes so that Ramsus could be held up, but it's very sketchy. After winning the fighting tournament, Faye decides to climb the castle wall and help out Bart and save Margie. Cheetah continues to be a no-show, just wander back to Yggdrasil instead. Then he comes up with the military coup strategy, which involves saying Nissan, which at that point had been an entire peaceful nation that has avoided the war between Ave and Kislev for 500 years, and feigning that Nissan has been aligned with Kislev in order to divert troops from Ledavik so Bart can take the capital. This plan fails spectacularly, and Nissan ends up getting invaded by Ave afterwards, and most people flee the country and become refugees in Kislev or hide out in the mountains. And after the other coup plan fails, the Yggdrasil is fleeing from Ramsus and Gabler. He attacks in his gear and ruins everyone in the neighbor's shit. Cheetah doesn't bother helping in the slightest, doesn't explain what's going on to Sigurd and the others, even if he had no reason to do so, and takes the only escape pods when given on the Yggdrasil, leaving his war-old body, Sigurd and all of the desert pirates, forlornly knows, to drown in quicksand.
They were fine.
Thanks, Cheetah. Thanks.
Thankfully, they were fine. Then, in Kislev, he pulls the strings to get the current Doctor Norton D-Block, the impoverished slum and prisoners Gulag district, in order to replace her and get close to the imprisoned Fabe. Almost immediately abandons his post for the better part of a week until the former Doctor, as we see, find out, choosing a new answer and turns to the slums. Almost the only time everyone calls him out of his bullshit. Faye's gear gets blown up by Rico's henchmen. Later that night, Edwid's cop tears everyone's responsible head off and shoots down her neck. And Cheetan decides to pin the blame on Red Rum, an horrific-looking but otherwise peaceful whales living in the sewers, and helps Faye and Rico murder it. In the following act, we find Ben, the mutant's orphan son, who still holds hope of his power one day will return, and also we found in Credence Lab the brother of the poor thing. Also, he had prior knowledge of Gabriel's plan to nuke Northshore and kept it for himself until it was already in progress. Fantastic. Wiseman shows up between Kislev battling tournament session and beats the shit out of Faye while letting out a few cryptic hints. Cheetan just sort of cocks an eyebrow and watches the fight. Vane decides to have the civilians evacuate D-Block during Gabriel's raid on Kislev, which amount to sort of wandering around with hammer and yelling at people to run in case the raid air silence and AA gunfire wasn't true enough, instead of melting the fight with Gabriel Goobers and Domina despite having access to his gear the entire time. Vane decides that the best way to escape Kislev back to Lava is to storm a military base, murder everyone in the party's way, and hijack an experimental airship, instead of, just flying over the mountains and everyone flying giant robots.
Tell me you wouldn't do the same.
And when the Goliath gets shot down, Cheetan decides to kamikaze the newly submersible Yggdrasil despite knowing full well it's Sigurd and Bart's ship. Again, that scene kinda comes the fuck out of nowhere because Cheetan kinda hints that he actually understands, and then for comedic purposes, we see that the Goliath crashes into the Yggdrasil. Considering everyone is fine afterward, it feels really that it's just a comedic moment.
I do wonder if that was originally supposed to be more serious, but then when they realized the terrible implications on, if Cheetan knowingly caused all that damage, they decided to have it be, no wait, don't you see, they're alive, it's fine. It was just a little comedic moment, isn't Cheetan so silly?
When the Yggdrasil is being attacked by Dominia in the High-Shao submarine, Cheetan decides to just hang out above the water with Rico and let Ellie, Bart, and Faye to take care of it. For the record, basically all the party's gear were perfectly capable of going underwater. He had no real reason to stay up. After Ellie returns from being briefly kidnapped by Dominia, Cheetan notices her acting strange and suspects she has been hypnotized. He fails to mention this to anyone and nearly lets Ellie melt down the ship's reactor.
Thankfully, Bart knew.
Again, he tries to justify this and saying that he wasn't entirely sure, didn't want to accuse everyone, but at least keeping an eye out on her.
Yeah.
Dominia returns in the Blade Gash and soon rounds through the High-Shao and attacks the Yggdrasil. Despite Ellie being brainwashed into nearly blowing up the Yggdrasil just minutes later, Cheetan insists she helped Bard and Faye fight it again. Cheetan himself just goes up to the bridge and talks some shit about Ramsel with Sigurd over tea. Faye gets his shit kicked in the fight. He nearly dies and falls into a coma. Cheetan decides to forget that he's a medical professional from Solaris to boot, and the next couple of hours are spent finding some medical aid from the ethos for Faye. Then he lets Ellie struggle through the translated Solarian data in the Ethos HQ base, but he decides to chime in when they get to the juicy parts, like how the Ethos was trying to break away from Solaris and use their technology for world domination. Then Bishop Stone, newly sensed king of space, attacks the Yggdrasil with the Ankan shell, and Cheetan doesn't bother to help with that fight either. Instead, Billy's father shows up in the band line, a tiny gear which can convert into a cannon that shoots its pilot with his bullet. Again, Cheetan invented this thing. And Cheetan manages to have the one and only Yggdrasil comic equipment malfunctioning the entire game before warning Billy is shooting his dad out of a cannon until it's too late. Wow. Beautiful.
I wonder if he actually wanted him to die at this point.
To be
this
fair,
man is a fucking mess.
Well, now we get to the part in Solaris.
God.
Cheetan makes everyone climb Babel Tower in order to reach some non-existent comic equipment in order to contact Shevat, when he apparently had contact with his wife who was in Shevat the entire time. Like I said, Babel Tower is probably the most time-wasting part of the game. Because
you could have just called them on your damn phone, but you had us climb through a dangerous tower for no good reason.
When when everyone actually gets to Shevat, he doesn't give his wife or daughter the time of day. If I you don't really even get a special line. Everyone has their limiters removed in Shevat thanks to Gaspar in order to get their 7 AP death blows, except Cheetah never had any. He was just faking it and holding back in fights, again, to keep out the facade. When the plan to liberate Ave crops up again, Cheetah decides that he's going on the team that will basically stroll into a mostly undefended Ledavik to take the capital with Sigurd. Not the one who has to go through, ground Prime Minister Shakan's forces down in Nissan Crypts or doing sort of actual fighting. Then he makes an educated guess of how Bart's Omnigears Andvari works when he knows full well how one properly operates since he fucking owns his Omnigear, Fenrir. Then Shakan is bringing to one of the Solaris gates, and Cheetah decides to stay behind in case things do not go well in order to protect Margie. Even though, again, you can recruit him still up immediately, so, again, I don't even know what that part of the game was for.
I get the feeling that at that point Cheetah was just trolling.
Then there's the plan of firing Fort Jasper's cannon at a Miron Bubbles Tower in order to blow up the Ethos HQ basement. Dr. Uzuki's running this plot is to sit in a control room in a just a mirror slightly downward towards the Ethos Vatican while otherwise sitting on his ass. The rest of the party has to battle the elements. Twice. Or fire laser cannon across the entire planet. Even then, he still misses the Ethos HQ, but he's lucky enough to strike close enough to the basement to cause the thing to go up like a firecracker, probably mostly due to lack of Solaris mechanical engineer standards. And as we know, thanks to the small bit that he has with UA before the invasion of Solaris, he was the swordsman, when he was training Jugend, but never bothered to use his skills, because of a sort of a samurai code that he had, and ever since he stopped the invasion of Shevat, he stopped using the sword. But hand-to-hand murders were okay, though.
Of course.
Then Emeralda, who has been trapped in a tube underground alone for 4,000 years, finally reunites with Faye, who in a past life was her creator. She makes him promise not to leave her alone again. When the operation to infiltrate Solaris begins, Cheetah immediately sticks her in the non-Faye second stringer team. But, there's also the other thing we mentioned. When breaking into the two parties into the Infiltrate Solaris, the teams are split into this. Cheetah, who lived in Solaris most of his life and still has regular contact back there in fluent Solaris language, and Ellie, who lived in Solaris up until a few years ago, are put up in a team with Faye. The team with everyone else has Jesse as the only Solaris speaker, Josiah, an alcoholic shotgun-wielding cowboy that hasn't been to Solaris in a decade. By all accounts, he immediately ditches them and they're all captured and nearly executed. Then the crowning moment, in the Sorin system, where he allows his friends, or at least companions, to consume human flesh a couple of rooms before finding the factory where they process the meat. When he finally gets called out from his bullshit by Ellie before reaching Crane's lab, he immediately flips off the lights, knocks out and kidnaps Ellie, and lets Faye get captured by the Gazelle Ministry. And while Faye is captured and restrained, Cheetah took it upon himself to taunt Faye about he's a useless, unmotivated slacker that just keeps fucking and cannot even protect the girly laws. He does this up to the point where Faye transforms into Id, but for no real reason. He was just curious and wanted to have a chat with Id in a position where he was in no danger of getting his head torn off and show down his ass.
Hey, Cheetah, there was this other guy who did a lot of crap because he was curious. His name was Xehanort. You should maybe chat him up here and there. I'm sure you guys could exchange notes.
I'm also getting there. Then releases everyone in the party from captivity and makes like that was the plan the whole time, and most likely makes up that bullshit about there being secondary secret limiters in people's head that he removed. And everyone buys it. Yeah, that's the thing. Faye is hesitant for a second, but Bart and the others were just so on board with that.
I guess they just really wanted to give Cheetah an out because they didn't want to imagine that they have dedicated so much of their life and time to a guy who's in reality just a dick.
It's also because he's kind of like the writer's pet. So we probably, or maybe in original draft, Cheetah was supposed to, stop being playable at the point and become a full-on villain, but they probably still wanted him to be playable, so they wanted to have an excuse to rejoin in the party properly. Then he blows out to the Phanosolaris gate along with Sigurd and Josiah, and conveniently vanishes before Biang starts zapping everyone before sliding. If you recall, his text box was the only one not present when she started zapping everyone when everyone was in pain. By the time of this 2, he finally decided to dust off his Omni-Gear, finding out the storage and use it out. He could have done this at any point earlier, but, you know. After Ellie and Faye recover from their injuries, Wardy sends Vetsurais his pistol attacking Ignas. Faye hops in the newly upgraded Veltal 2 to fly in there and trying to stop Soai's attack. Meanwhile, Cheetah and Ellie go to a Zeboy mass driver facility to fire on machines into the atmosphere to remove everyone's limiters on the surface. Faye makes Cheetah promise to look after Ellie, and he does so, but then proceeds to ditch Ellie on the trip there since he was lying about his Omni-Gear actually being around to use yet. And he sends instead Emeralda in his place instead. Close enough, right? Once Emeralda and Ellie fight their way through the forest outside Tora's house into the Zeboy facility, at least that's what the narration zone says. She only decides to show up at the very end after everything is clear in order to press the button to launch the machines into space, which, as we know, will turn out the world population into zombies. Oops. To be fair, that was also partially Krelian's fault. Tora and Cheetah did not knew about that.
That's it. I'm beginning to guess to you. Is this why Darkade referred to Krillin as the runner-up for biggest monster in the game?
Well, yeah, remember, there's also the entire stuff that he did in... Remember, all the biological experiment in Solaris, they were basically all of his inventions.
No. What I mean is like, well, no, I'm talking specifically about how he referred to Krillin as the runner-up for biggest monster in the game. Was Cheetah the biggest on his list?
No. This is, like he said, this is more tongue-in-cheek. But don't worry, I'm getting to the end. When all the NPCs become more mutated, Cheetah decides to let Ellie, the newly appointed Fempope and Solarian pilot, take care of the scene instead of ever offering to help with his medical expertise. Or again, that's also what the narration zone says. Probably, he might have done it off screen, but we never know. Then after defeating Jill elements, he steals their sword to use on its own gear. Yeah, it is actually one drop that happens. Never acknowledges the fact that Emperor King got stabbed in the face, even though he had direct contact with him. Oops. Again, maybe that was cut stuff. In Mahanon, Cheetah accesses the Razel database computer, and when Graf attacks, he demands Faye and Bart to hold them back, while he extracts as much data as possible, and if anything goes wrong, he will destroy the place. And then proceeds to neither obtain any more useful information, nor destroys the system. Then, the cherry on top at the very end, he unfastens the calculation of Bart's big battle plan on attacking Merkava, resulting in the entire thing exploding and the creation of a final god-awful dungeon in its wake. Then there's the cock teasing about Ramzus, but again, that probably was just crap stuff. And finally, he sees his daughter one last time before the final battle, doesn't acknowledge she exists, doesn't question what happened to her mother between discs, and leaves her in the last icy hideout of humanity with Dan as her only friend. But I know what you're thinking. Damn, that makes Cheetah really looking bad for this. Well, what if I told you that this is only one way to pronounce his name? You can mention this also in the traditional English way, Citan, but also in a way that the proper correct way in Japanese also is Shitan. And I know the joke is, oh, it sounds like shit, but more than that, is that it resembles another word, shaitan, which in Islamic is the word to indicate Satan, aka the light bringer.
I kind of figured that's where this is going to.
And who is the light bringer but a fallen angel, one that actually cared about, believed in a lot of humanity and wanted potentially to guide them more on instead of God, just in his own way. Again, the religious symbolism is on point with this game, and I absolutely love it for it. But yeah, that pretty much covers it. So, that only leaves the final thoughts. And Dwebs, do you mind going first?
Sure, okay. I will say, this game definitely has a lot of good ideas in it. I just don't think the execution was all there, whether it was down to the troubled development cycle, or whether those ideas were just kind of iffy from the start. Alright, I'll talk... Okay, like I said, the story itself was perfectly okay from a concept standpoint. I just think it was messed up in execution. Be it whether they had to rush through things in Disc 3 with all those bits where the characters are sitting on a chair doing pantomime scenes, or some bits that might have been good, but are ruined by either really silly dialogue, or just coming off rather icky, like like the whole romance between cousins thing. Like, what's that state, Jova?
Alabama.
Yeah. It's
Don't
like,
you see, guys? They were cousins.
Again, more on point will be the Habsburg line.
It'd be like if in Sailor Moon, that's what it really was like originally.
The Alabama power is growing within them all.
Yeah, great, isn't it? No, it isn't actually. It's gross. As for the characters, I liked Cheetan sometimes when he wasn't being a dickhead. The butler was cool.
Maison.
Yeah. That's really about it. All the rest are just kind of okay for the most part. But man, I think Ellie really got the short end of the stick. It's bad enough. I mean, I get it. You know, her backstory is meant to be. She's a pretty tragic character. But what good is that if she's basically the 1998 equivalent of Princess Elise? So she gets kidnapped like the same number of times and for the same reason. So the main bad guy wants her so they can unleash an ultimate power on everybody. In this game, Ellie got kidnapped 6 freaking times, and it got to the point where I'm like, you know, for being a trained military soldier, you sure get kidnapped a lot.
Okay, to be fair,
Which kind of made me a bit difficult to take her seriously.
To be fair, just because you're trained in all this doesn't mean you're never going to get caught into a position where you do have to give yourself up or you do get kidnapped.
But 6 times!
Okay, if I'm to be fair, I wouldn't say that took away from her believability as a military official or whatnot. I will agree it did get a little bit crazy, though, with how many times she got captured or incapacitated, though. I will give you that.
Yeah, that's like with any storytelling trope. The use of it isn't inherently a bad idea, but if you overuse it, it risks being an annoyance. Okay, the graphics. Yeah, it's like I said. I mean, I don't know if I said it in this video, but it's interesting in that the PS1 definitely had a load of good looking 2D games, and some of the 3D games, if you weren't made by a first or second party studio, were really mixed. You get them either looking really, really good or really, really bad. So it's interesting that this goes for a hybrid of the two. Like the DS Pokemon games. It has 2D sprites, but the rest of it is 3D models. And I think it looks fine for the most part. And then is it just having a PS1 Squaresoft made game with a free camera? Well, when I say free camera, I mean you can move
There's
it
a lot of
around.
freedom. And again, the other important thing, only a handful of FMVs, otherwise most of the cutscenes are in real time with the actual game engine. That's also what's important.
Maybe it'd be really impressive if that included the anime cutscenes. The PS1 was that powerful.
What about the music, Dweebs?
It's fine. I mean, it's not exactly something I put high up on the memorability scale, but I will give it credit in that it really does try to be different from other Squaresoft games at the time. It goes for a more, I won't say techno-y, but more gothic style with electronic elements.
Again, I would also like to remind that, again, that you haven't seen it because it was explained in part 2, but I would like to remind that part of the soundtrack contains a spoken line from an unreleased, audio script from a trial for murder for Marlon Brando's son. I have no idea why.
Yeah.
Because
And we hear it throughout the game.
Yeah, it's the main boss theme.
Speaking of,
I don't even know about the theming. What does this have to do with the themes of the game?
It's just like vocal sampling. This isn't lo-fi, guys. Come on.
I can answer that possibly.
what?
Yes.
Well, that guy was on trial, and in a way, during a boss fight, you're on a trial of sorts.
So what did you think of the villains, Dwibs?
I mean, I get their motivations. I mean, aside from Yang, they really didn't leave much of an impression.
So if this game got released to this day with at least at very least the quality of life improvements that me and Jova discussed, better presentation, better translation,
More consistent storytelling.
Oh yeah, about the translation before you finish that.
For
point,
Richard.
Yeah, I agree. Richard really got the short end of the stick with his employees walking out on him, which I mean,
That's incredible. Like I said before,
I don't
it's
know why
incredibly unprofessional.
Yeah, I don't know why they. I don't know why they even consider. I don't know why they even agreed to do it in the first place. When they're balked upon seeing the script, I'm like, guys, if you didn't want to do it, why'd you agree to it in the first place?
Well, it's more like they didn't know about all the apparent religious bashing until it got to that point.
I don't put a walkout like that.
Okay, look.
Let me put it this way as well. Like, it's also on par with Square for not providing proper substitutes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, look. Like the guys walking out, they had the freedom to. It's more on Square for not having the
but
replacements.
That's the thing, Jova. I blame all of them for it. Sure, the company for not providing an answer, but also the actual translator for causing the problem in the first place.
You know what? I will give you that. Like, I am sympathetic to why they may have walked out, because religion bashing in some ways can be seen kind of on par with racism in some regards, so I can get why if people were offended, they didn't want to work on it, didn't want to support that. I definitely pin the blame more on Square. I won't say that the people who left weren't at fault, but I won't say that they weren't justified in that either.
Yeah, and as a result, half the time we get dialogue that I can so imagine Tommy was so writing and saying.
I'm just gonna say this. How sad is it that Richard probably had a much better experience with localizing Final Fantasy VIII? A localization of his that I'm not particularly fond of, but I'll admit probably still got handled way better than this one, which is like the man who rages against the storm all on his own.
Well, he had a team for that one. The team didn't quit on him for that one, so there was that.
So yeah, it just goes to show you that sometimes great art isn't born from adversity. Sometimes the guy's just knackered and he makes something and it's shit because he's knackered.
Like, the whole art from adversity thing is, by principle, a bit of a flawed concept. Like, it's something where, yes, that can be the case, but the problem is when people specifically make it to be the case, which is like, no, like, intentionally making it adverse is never really gonna be a good idea.
It's like trying to make something intentionally so bad it's good.
If this game was re-released to these days with at least some kind of quality improvement, like a retranslation, or at the very least also some, some way to actually make the experience more enjoyable, and including at least the cut content, would you be willing to give it a chance? Especially because you haven't told us about the gameplay. How do you feel about the gameplay itself?
I mean, on the subject of the gameplay, I mean, it's typical PS1 RPG stuff that you get at the time. There's just a few more little bits and pieces added to it to make it stand out. And as for whether I'd want to to try something else, I mean, if they rejig the story, or if the creator got to put everything he wanted into it, since that's more of a possibility nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Just improve on a lot of the really flawed parts, like I mentioned. Then yeah, I'd be willing to do it, because I mean, some of those, I mean, sometimes actually pretty unique for at least for a Japanese RPG when it was made, but it was retired even by 1998.
All right, Jova, you're next.
Okay. Xenogears. I think one of the best ways to describe this game is that it is very, very unique. But in some cases, maybe a little too unique for its own good. Best to start from the beginning overall, starting with the development overall. Like, okay, I'm not gonna lie, the development of this is herky-jerky. Mind you, most of the blame does indeed lie with Square with how they screwed this one over bad. They screwed it over in favor for what they thought was gonna be the big moneymaker, which turned out not to be the case. And they screwed over the localizing team by not providing Richard with a replacement. I mean, granted, I guess you could say that they, quote-unquote, rewarded him by keeping him on board afterwards. Woohoo.
Or at least gave him better treatment. Remember, this was also, as we mentioned in the mentioned itself in the interview that we linked in part 0. This was also one first major case where like the localizers were talking directly with the development team. So there was some minor groundbreaking stuff that was kept later on. And as we do know, the translations for stuff like Final Fantasy IX became a bit more groundbreaking because Square allowed the team a bit more creative freedom to try to spice things up and to closely eventually give an alternative to the different potential accents and different kinds of culture that the game provided for an English release.
That may be the case. That may be the case, considering it probably culminated into Richard's decision to localize Dragon Quest VIII full of British accents and stuff like that, which set the standard for Dragon Quest localizations to this day. So there is that.
Well,
remember, like I said, like it was talking about the creative freedom to do something involving because the whole British accents all over Dragon Quest VIII, that was Richard's idea.
Regardless, though, let it not be said that only bad stuff came from Xenogears. No, because a lot of good also came from it in that regard as well. I do feel like, though, Xenogears is... I find it to be a good representation of one of Square's many patterns that they can't shake off. They have a good stream of goodwill and good games, only to then pull off some incredibly stupid stuff that puts them in danger of getting shut down until one game comes along that saves them from their own stupidity. Lather, rinse, repeat.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that they're still climbing out of to this day. Like, again, 7 Remake, again, kind of helped save them. Yeah. Okay, enough about Square's own screw-ups here. This game itself, though, for as much as Square did screw up, I do feel like there were some moments where even with all the development problems in mind, I do feel like the creator of this game could have handled some things better. Now, I do get it. Several games in mind he had to squander down into one, and I will give him this, it was a bold move of him to at least give us a much better and conclusive ending than probably would have happened if we had just gone with, the episode 1 plan by the looks of what Tio showed us in the Perfect Works book. So, kudos to him for doing that as well. That being said, this game is a game of 2 halves. The first half arguably moves along way too slow. And I'm not just talking about the text on the box. I mean, the pacing does feel like it drags at times. It does feel like at times the game is just spinning its wheels, waiting, and you're waiting for it to get to its point. It really does ask for a lot of patience from the player. Then comes the second half where they suddenly put a lead foot on the gas pedal and speed in. Now again, I get it. This is where they really had to cut corners. But it really just comes to a point where I wonder if maybe they should have just tried to trim everything into a nice, concise segment. Not to mention the fact that, let's hope you grinded well before the second half begins. You eventually do get a chance to grind. But again,
like you said, for the scripted battles before you get a chance to grind, the game is balanced, so you do have a fair chance to do this. Again, Gears, for example, are automatically equipped with more updated parts to sustain the level scaling.
Although, if I recall correctly, you still need to grind for Deus in preparation.
I mean, yeah, but you get the opportunity to do it. I'm talking about the scripted fights between the narration zones.
Yes, of course. Unfortunately, though, it does force you to have to, do a bit of bulk grinding at that last bit. Again, it would have been nice if they gave us the field overall. And again, kudos to them for providing us with balanced boss fights for the most part throughout there. Like, a lot of developers would not have had that foresight, so I do commend them for having the foresight on that regard. That being said, though, even without all that, the story feels like a sudden drastic uptake in how it's being told, with a lot of things happening off-screen. Hell, even the Gebblers become good guys without even it really being mentioned in the text. It's just, now they're good guys. Which is a bit of a shame. But That being said, as for the story's conclusion, it's happy enough. But I do have my issues, which I'll get to when I talk about the villains. As for the characters as a whole, Faye's an overall likable guy here who you can sympathize with, and I think he's fair and fine enough. So kudos. Cheetan was surprisingly a very entertaining character. How much of that was for the right reasons is up for you to debate here and there, or who knows, maybe that was also part due to Pedro's wonderful ad-libbing as the good doctor, but, like, holy cow. I do see what you mean, though, about Cheetan potentially being a creator's pet in that regard, because the writers let him get him.
I can tell you this, Jova, the Xenosaga trilogy has a playable character that's basically almost a carbon copy of him, just with his line personality changing, as in being more of a screw-up. So it feels Takashi learned a bit out of this, but still wanted the character to show up.
To give full credit, it also has to do with your ad-libbing of Bart chastising him. So I was basically just more reacting to you than anything.
I love how that blossomed into its own routine.
No, my favorite one was the one where Ellie was surrendering to Krillin and she was like, "Look, this is not gonna work. Like, maybe we should think about this." And then I remember Shiro like, "Oh, now you're thinking about this," and I'm like, "Can we please focus on the evil madman trying to kill us, please?"
Which is funny because Krillin feels like Cheetan 2.0 just ramped up to 11 and without the redeeming qualities when you get down to it.
You can argue he's the person Cheetan could have become if he stayed fully loyal to Solaris.
Oh my god, that does look like Cheetan.
Even the last name, Jin Uzuki.
Wow. But yeah, no. Cheetan is... Okay, I'd say Cheetan himself could be a selling point for this game because... My god! Now granted, you will either love this character or you will hate him. Or like me, it'll be right down the middle between the two. Because, holy crap, we literally just got through a diatribe about all the crap Cheetan does. What does help is that eventually the characters do call him out on his crap. And at the end of the day, it seems that he was a nice guy. Though I'll admit, now with the knowledge that he may have blown up his own village and not learned anything from that, does make me wonder if he is legit a sociopath. Cause holy crap.
Remember that bit from Up at Treasure Island where Long John Silver is about to shoot Jim? And he's like, "Ah, damn it, Jim, I could never harm you." Like, that's basically how I feel about Cheetan. Right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Also, Jova, gee, maybe the fact that he was upbringed into a city full of flying Nazis might have not helped.
And yet, somehow I'd argue he kind of turned out better than Elliot for that. Because he at least realized that they are flying Nazis, and they may be some bad news. Granted, the revelation that he only gave up the war for Solaris because of sex.
Look, sometimes you just have to do it, okay?
Even if it means betraying everything you knew and everyone you loved?
Yes.
Okay, but yeah, okay, no. Cheetan was entertaining. Bart was also a pretty nice character as well. I had fun acting as him. He's spunky, upbeat, and he's one who manages to charge through, and even though he comes off as a goof, can come up with pretty good plans here and there. Billy was interesting. A guy who has to come to terms with the fact that his church and religion were pretty much all a lie for some pretty scummy people.
And very bad people to boot, yeah.
And it turns out that his father, who, let's be honest, wasn't the best person himself, was the person he should have been looking up to. Which...
Sadly, part of the cut content involves also Jesse's, extended backstory, as in the reason why he had to abandon his family and why he got the scar after he came back.
Let me guess, something to do with Solaris?
Well, obviously, he did, he was born and grew up and then, escaped from there. It mostly involved him helping someone from Solaris that he was a close friend to him. But then this person dies, and Jesse decides to apply the fingerprints and facial recognition of him out of respect, and that's why he gets the scar and the new game, the new name, Josiah Black, because that other person was that name. His original name was Josiah Blanche.
I might as well bring up this point now that you do mention it. Hearing about a lot of the cut content does make me wonder what they considered a parameter for what could have just been explained, because they do a lot of talking in the second half that I'd argue we could have maybe have added in for just a little bit more context.
Just to keep in tune with what you were saying about Billy, like I said, I do believe we should have got at least one scene in the Icy Hideout where Billy talks to his father.
Oh, yeah, because like you mentioned, like, this is sort of tailored to Billy's character, but Josiah kind of disappears near the end of the game.
Disc 1.
Yeah, after Disc 1, he's never mentioned, which really just makes me wonder if he was originally supposed to die with the scene with the gun here. Well, you know, the gun that Cheetan made.
That's too early, to be honest. So, and he still has a role to play even in Solaris. So, no, it doesn't really make any sense.
Well, then again, I guess, speaking of Billy's character, though, the scene with Josiah supposedly dying, as you mentioned, feels kind of like they were going to, but then chickened out, because they really do leave a big pause on it, and it would have been a good sacrificial scene of showing about...
Okay, to be completely fair, products in the past have done this kind of bait and switch a lot, like the Disney's version of Peter and the Wolf towards its end. So I get the idea why they might have also do that for the sake of, not harping too much on the tension. I just believed that the way the story was, put, it really clashed a bit with what we were going for.
Oh, I agree. Like, bait and switches are nothing I'm new to, but literally the way it was shot really did feel like legit they were killing him off. And in a sense where him being alive does feel kind of jarring, seeing as how they don't even really explain how he escaped, even. It's like, despite them going into all the records about how this will absolutely get him killed, he just survived.
Alright, go on.
Okay, and next on the good characters is Choo Choo. Yeah, Choo Choo was legit surprising in how she developed, going from being kind of an annoying party member who, for some reason, had the hots for Faye.
Yeah, I don't get it.
I don't even want to imagine what the offspring would have turned out like, but regardless, she grows out of it, and then goes on to be actually a pretty useful party member in both story and in gameplay. Although it does beg some questions on why she's useless in scenes that should only render Gears useless. But what you gonna do? Nah, she ends up being pretty likable and can have a take-duty attitude. Good on her. Next up is Emeralda here and there. I'll just say this, Emeralda gets dicked over by the story too much. Like, it's like, and one of those moments is by Cheetan. Asked for Faye never to leave her, and then Cheetan literally puts you on the party without her. Like, come on. There's only so much that story and gameplay segregation can explain. Because that technically is story-wise.
Even if you pay attention, you don't get to play as Emeralda on foot for a very long time until the very end of the escaping from Solaris sequence, and the Crescents doesn't get to be properly piloted until the first Anima Relic dungeon, which is way into this too.
Hell, when you get down to it, also Emeralda has a bit of not necessarily optional character syndrome, but she has an important bit to her that is optional, and it's clearly very important because she shows up as her older form in the ending cutscene. So I ask, why was this not just a segment that we made as, mandatory? It's very... Yeah?
It's kind of like how in King's Quest 6 you can have a moment where you save Beast from his beast form, and the genie will still show up disguised even if you already trapped them. Oops.
Like, okay, I'll give Final Fantasy VII credit. They actually went out of their way to not have Yuffie and Vincent in the final cutscene because they're optional, of course. And I guess to be fair, nobody expected that 7 would blow up to be that popular, let alone Yuffie and Vincent becoming as popular to the point where...
It's weird, however, because for comparison, 6 does take into account the optional party members for the final sequence where all the team is supposed to be involved. The problem with 7 is that was a proper FMV, meaning that they had to actually decide what to do. And to also keep in mind that 7 kind of had its own like travel development cycle, in a sense that up until a few months before release, the story was going through a very different direction. Like again, it's something that you can look up online a lot, and there's also a lot to talk about it, like stuff that at some point Midgar was supposed to be the only place you visited in a sort of a noir detective vibe. But again, that would be too digressing.
I will actually say this, it's good you brought up 7. In a way, I view Xenogears as kind of a what if Final Fantasy VII's troubled development had gotten to it more than it appeared to? Because whereas 7 came out a darling despite its development, Xenogears feels more like a bit of a troubled product, and again, that is due in no small part to its troubled development. Because again, as we mentioned, there are a lot of similarities between the stories, and I can definitely believe that Xenogears was originally going to be Final Fantasy VII. But I'll get more back to that later. But yeah, those characters that I talked about are fine. Now let's get to the characters that are a little bit more troubled, starting with Ellie. Okay, I like Ellie. She has a bit of a troubled start, though, in how she comes off as a major hypocrite, but thankfully the story does get to the point with her soon enough about how she's really masking her own insecurities here. That's fine. The problems are that she does not get as much presence in the story as one would hope. Because after her first encounter with Faye, she pretty much faffs off for quite a bit of the story, comes back later, has some troubles here and there, and, well, yeah, a lot of the story is about Ellie being in trouble. Now, mind you, that is not inherently a bad thing. Aerith, by comparison, got into a lot of trouble in Final Fantasy VII. However, Aerith made up for it with a lot of spunk and actual usefulness as well, despite her troubles that befell her. Again, Aerith technically dies, well, not technically, actually does die, and I could make an argument that she accomplishes more than Ellie does in the overall plot of this here and there, because Ellie's endgame, in the end of the story, is to ask for Cheetan and everyone, is to ask for Faye and everyone to forgive Krellian, the goddamn monster himself.
Again, I don't want to blame Ellie nor Faye for it, because at least they're trying to put their heart in a place that is better than just asking for petty revenge. It's just a matter of circumstances, not, favoring this particular outcome. That's the problem.
If I may, to sum up my big issue with this, my big issue with that is the same issue I have with a lot of Ellie. If there was some development between Ellie and Krellian that explains why she feels that way about him, we did not really get to see it. In fact, Krellian becoming more serene was a development that we did not get to see. Which is a problem I'll come back to later, but yeah. I feel like Ellie is fine. She's just on the border of being not good, but I feel like she has enough good stuff that she is fine. Could have been better. Which is more than can be said for Rico. Okay, it's not so much that Rico is a bad character so much as his character arc just stops after Kislev, pretty much. Like,
his character arc, Jova, I will argue he basically becomes a complete spectator.
Pretty much. Like,
sometimes he'll get like one line, but he may as well be a member right here next to us watching the game.
Like, it says something that his lackey Hammer arguably gets more of a character arc than he does. Like, and I know they meant well with Rico, but it's weird that Rico, not having his character arc complete, gets to be a playable character when there are more suitable ones, like, Margie, who is actually accidentally even there in the ending, despite her not being there prior.
Mind
Whoops.
you, the FNV showcase, but also the rest of the Yggdrasil crew is there. In fact, the other guy that's voiced by Cam Clark is supposed to be the navigator, the guy who stands near the steering wheel and gives you the controls of the Yggdrasil every time you speak to him.
Huh. Cute. Still, though, again, if not Margie, why not have given some more screen and playable time to Emeralda? Again, Faye's poor daughter got screwed over so badly. But no, okay, for all Emeralda getting screwed over, at least she feels like she serves a good purpose to the story. Rico's purpose is, he's the big bad champ, until he isn't. And not much else. Hell, even gameplay-wise, he kind of loses relevance because he ain't exactly the best character to play as either.
Even from the beginning, I argued again. There are people who can appreciate the fact that he's basically a tank, but again, his lack of speed and potentially precision makes you don't consider him a high priority. Yeah.
So that just begs the question, who could potentially have it worse than Rico? Maria. Okay, yeah. Maria! Again, I just said it before. She feels like more of a joke character than the actual joke character. And her character arc, Rico's character arc felt like it was going somewhere until it just flat wasn't. Maria's character arc does technically get completed, but in an arguably pretty hokey fashion. We get suddenly hit with all this stuff dumped on us about how tragic it is that our father gave away his humanity to be merged with a machine. Something, her mother may be secretly bonded to the mech she has or whatnot, but actually no, the mech is actually her original father's personality, yada yada yada. We deal with that, and it's dealt with so quickly. And that's it for her big growth.
Yeah.
After that, she pretty much just tags along with us. Only she's kind of a load.
The only major thing that she does is she's responsible for making sure the party enters and exits safely from Solaris. That's it.
And that is pretty much it. Look, I didn't want to hate her. In fact, you know what? I don't even hate her. It's just that I'm disappointed. The story talks up a big game with her, oh, it's amazing that this child takes on these responsibilities, yet they make her look so silly while doing them as well, to the point where she is literally sitting on top of her mech underwater, potentially drowning. Yes, yeah. I know gameplay story segregation, but as far as the story is concerned, she is so in tune with her mech that she is always on top of it, regardless of the environment. And I'm like, come on, surely for that bit, you could have edited the sprite. But nah, and yeah, sadly Maria's really the load. Which is really a shame, because, again, she seemed like an interesting character concept here, and I think the best way to describe all problems in this game, except for a few, are they had good ideas for concepts, but the execution was lacking in a lot of those regards. But those are our heroes. I'll just sum up the villains overall here with my biggest problem here. Okay, so let's start with Lacan and Graphian there. Overall, good, menacing, has a good arc, it's interesting, and somewhat thematic that Graph, aka Lacan, ends up being tied to Faye's father, while his mother was also at some point tied to Myung. Holy cow, Faye kind of had some pretty bad luck with his parents getting taken over by these eldritch abominations.
It's all really a clusterfuck from the very beginning of time for these people, Joe. No real questions asked on that. Like he said, it really makes the whole deal with the Fatima line being incestuous with each other kind of like a footnote in comparison.
I know, right? And again, they're arguably some of the better people in all this, because Graph's a monster. That said, I actually do like that he was tied to Wiseman, even though that does mean that at certain points, right after Graf left off stage, then suddenly it's like, okay, I'm Wiseman now, changes clothes, comes back on board.
Well, remember, that was not a facade, that was the personality of Khan taking over and using Wiseman as a disguise.
Oh, true. What I mean is, like, well, I like to imagine that after Graf goes off screen, he turns back into Faye's father, dons the Wiseman cloak, and after pretty much burning Faye, comes in to encourage Faye.
The duality of man.
I guess. And you know what? Nah, the stuff with him is good for the most part. I do feel like it sucks that when Faye finally does meet his father truly face to face, it's when he has to die, which is, yeah, very, very Star Wars-esque. But I can sort of get where they were going with it. Me personally, I feel like we could have had his father survive a bit more so that at least Faye could get to know him again. But you know, if we really did have to get things down to stuff here and there, that's fine. And I'll say this, they handled Faye's parents' deaths better than they handled Ellie's parents' deaths, because, like, her parents are just around to show what her life's like, only to then supposedly survive, and then later just die. Yeah, there did not feel like there was much point to Ellie's parents, sadly. I mean, they did have a nice...
Also to reinforce how they look like, in order to establish the question about why Ellie looks like that, in order to eventually, when the shoe gets dropped on her, being, you know, the antitype, you know, it clicks there. Oh, that's why she didn't look like her parents.
And kudos on that. It's just that I do kind of get what Dwibs meant about her parents not getting as much rep as we could have given them. Like, maybe we could have fleshed them out a bit more before killing them, because it makes them feel more like tools than actual characters. But no. Faye's parents, I feel, were handled overall better in that regard. However, let's talk about... Actually, no, before we get to Myung, let's talk about Ramses. Poor Ramses! I can pretty much just sum this up as poor Ramses. He did not deserve any of this crap. And you know what? As much as a shame it is that he didn't show up as the Sixth Ranger playable character, which he was clearly foreshadowed to be, I like to imagine that he at least just finally got to settle down with his harem and get laid by people who actually love him instead of that piece of trash Myung.
Mm-hmm. And that guy's nothing but trash.
Lay off the poor man. He's had it hard. But no. Ramses just turned out to be a good boy in the end. And he got what all good boys deserve, too. Now, speaking of trash, Myung. Oh, Myung. She is a fantastically hateable villain, possibly on par with the likes of Azula, and she's really great until she becomes a non-entity in the end. Yeah, this is one thing I've been hinting at, but if there's one disappointment I do have with this game, is that it feels like the absolute big bads of the game kind of get off pretty easy. Oh, now don't get me wrong, Myung does get destroyed, and you, the player, get the honor of destroying her, but with no reaction from her. Now I know what one may be thinking. Oh, but she was just an AI. She doesn't really have feelings. That may be fine if she didn't show obvious sadistic glee at the trouble she causes people to the point of actually laughing about it at some times. No feelings, my rear end. She was clearly enjoying it. So just taking her out when there's nothing to it, I feel like that takes a lot of the satisfaction out of it. Like, I would have killed to have seen a villainous breakdown from her or something as you are undoing her plans as Deus and just giving her the middle finger, but no, it's just silent ending boss fight. And you know what? If that's enough for you, that's fine. And I know some people may be bringing up, well, Sephiroth technically didn't talk when you finally beat him. Well, yeah, but at least we got the satisfaction of seeing his stunned face when even his backup plan of taking over Cloud's mind in the end of 7 pretty much blows up in his face, and he gets blown up too. With Myung, sadly, no such final pleasure here and there. It's kind of like if Azula didn't have her villainous breakdown at the end when she got defeated, and it's like, She has no reaction whatsoever to getting beaten. That's what it feels like with Myong, sadly. But hey, maybe we could actually punish that other villain of ours, Krellian. Well, Tio kind of already made the joke about it, but no such luck. Yeah, if Chiton feels like one creator's pet, Krellian feels like the creator's pet that just gets away with it all. Like Chiton, Krellian seems to have a plan for everything. And mind you, he is very entertaining when he is absolutely insane. Like, he's insane enough to make Liquid Snake seem sane by comparison. Just funny considering banana machines.
It's the same voice actor.
Yes.
Yeah.
But, okay, so you know what? Again, Krellian had a really good run as a bad guy here. Entertaining. Had plans up the wazoo. And seeing his origin, again, it's not an excuse, but it does give good reason for why he just flew off the handle. Of course, this is partly because the woman who he loved didn't love him and all that, but hey, who's counting?
Again, the entire motivation behind this monster of a villain is, as Deji put it very eloquently, a cock arc.
Yeah, which again, this explains why he puts Ramses so much, because he's jealous that Ramses actually got some, and with God no less. Yeah, he was projecting this whole time.
Krellian, at just the end of the day, he truly is maidenless.
In the end, Krellian himself was the pure trash. So...
He's like, you have the better genes, Faye.
Actually, while we're at it, Jova, before you conclude for the character sheets, just a brief mentioning. What about the Gazelle Ministry?
Oh, yeah, those guys. He's talking about the monitor heads. They're fine. It's kind of like with you. I wish they had done more. Granted, the revelation that the Emperor Cain was the one working against them to protect humanity was cool and all. It's just like, they talk a lot of crap, but they were never really the ones to accomplish anything, as the villain Krellian pretty much points out as
They're
well.
mostly for exposition hints, basically. They were to foreshadow most of the twist later on, but without context, so that the player is more confused until the information gets incorporated.
I feel like the Gazelle Ministry, they share probably the most common problem with a lot of problems in this game. They have a lot of build-up, but no proper payoff in that regard. I guess as for all the other characters to sum up, Bart's Pirate Brigades, they're great. Margie's Sister Ministry, they're fine.
Hammer?
Okay, you know what? He had a surprisingly good character arc. Ended massively in tragedy, but honestly, it was kind of interesting to see the comic relief go into, well, becoming one of the most scariest villains.
That is true, but I want to ask a question tied to not before his betrayal.
Oh, right, I almost forgot.
His general aptitude. Like, again, if I recall correctly, in the Japanese version, he just speaks with the Kansai accent or that idiot from Osaka kind of trope. But as you can see, what Richard decided to do was a bit more stereotypical.
Yeah.
What do you think?
That was iffy, and I will admit, while I do like his arc overall, there were still problems. Now, granted...
Faye's remarks toward him feel completely out of character and don't know why.
Yeah, true, yeah, like... I think I can overall describe it that I like this game in broad strokes. It's just when you analyze stuff that you do remember, oh yeah, we had these problems along the road. Yeah, the whole development between Hammer and Faye had a lot of uncalled stuff from Faye, which is weird because Faye is normally this incredibly nice guy. But it's just to Hammer, he's kind of a dick, which makes one wonder if this is why Hammer went insane. Now mind you, like you did say, we can get more development if we speak to him on the Yggdrasil. I would still say, though, this is kind of a bad idea on how to tell your story if you're relying on a character to do something optional to make sense for something that's mandatory. Now, I'm not saying you can't have extra details here and there, but I will admit that Hammer suddenly holding Ellie at gunpoint did feel a little bit out of nowhere, I will admit.
Anyway, okay, you're done with the characters, Jova?
Well, okay, like I just wanted to cap off with Krellian, I was liking where we were going, But then he just ends the ride by being suddenly calm and serene, and it's not as entertaining, and again, he somehow became this way off screen. Oh sure, he kind of explains it, but I do feel like the whole bit where he and Ellie came to this point would have been much better if they had shown, or at least explained better, how we got to that point overall. But yeah, those are the characters overall in a nutshell. As to the music, I liked it overall. There were some bits that are just feel like they're your typical background music, but overall I'd say the soundtrack was fine. Nothing amazing, but fine. The visuals, I like them. It does definitely feel like a bit of a first step in a lot of ways, which, again, Project Cross Zone 2 would probably be the endpoint for which this was perfected, and how it and its gameplay is sort of enacted. So fair beans there. Yeah, like I said, the story overall, I feel like my biggest problem with the story is when it's clearly going, just wait, you'll totally see where this is going, and you wait, you don't get anything, you wait, you get a little bit, but not really enough, and you wait. Now mind you, I'm not talking about stuff like the endgame twist where, yeah, it turned out humanity was this or that. No, I can get saving stuff like that for near the end, but there are some moments where the game really does take its time to get to the point. And I can get how that would definitely try someone's patience overall, because at that point, it can feel like a bout of wasted time here. And I do feel like stuff like this could be fixed better with a remake. Not just because of the text speed, but they could have placed some explanations to the story in different parts here and there. I do get the semblance that this started off as a project that was going steadily along, but then as soon as Square started to, drop the hammer on them, you can definitely tell exactly where they started to panic. Because that second half especially feels like they were in panic mode. That's it. As for the game as a whole, I do overall consider it a fine game. After all, I'll say this. I consider it good in broad strokes, but you will need the patience to get through a lot of the bad stuff as well here. It is not perfect, and it definitely needs a remake. That's it.
Alright, Shiro, you're up next.
Alright.
Let's go.
I have far less to say, I'm gonna be honest.
Don't worry. Go ahead.
I feel like this was a very enjoyable experience. It is riddled with flaws from just storytelling to gameplay, but the character interactions are so good that it actually masks a lot of stuff for me. Like I genuinely enjoy most of the characters, even Shitan, even though I like to bully him, honestly.
We all do, Shiroi. We all do.
I can't hate him, honestly.
Shiroi, it's us bullying him helps balance out his own dickishness, which is the magic.
See, I told you, you love me and you know it.
Well, again, it's like the quote from earlier, greatest asshole. See,
Yes.
that sums it up right there. Even, I like the music, even I don't like the very questionable track. I mean, the rest of the track is good, but that one line, why was it there?
The world may never know.
Even after a documentary of making of, I really wish Mitsuda was actually asked that, like, how we got that and why he decided to employ that in his track.
Maybe there isn't an answer, and it really was just because.
Yeah, maybe it was just a case of, oh, it sounds foreign and was exotic, probably that.
Yeah. I would play this game if it was re-released with some heavy changes.
Yeah.
And I don't mean a remaster, I mean get rid of the style over function effects that are riddled all over the place.
Would you say the gameplay overall was fun?
RPG gonna RPG is what I have to say about it. So
enough.
yeah, it's fine. It seems functional. it probably would have been better if the stuff that needed to be completed was completed. But I'm also talking about the visual stuff that, again, is style over substance. It was just unnecessary and doesn't actually need to be there.
Remember, Jova, outside of the actual flashing, which gets represented like every time there's a big explosion, for example, there are also a lot of sequences where, in order to accentuate the mood of the scene, like say a city being destroyed, everything gets like a orange scale to red filter, for example, and stuff like that.
Also, the old-timey camera/TV stuff we get later on.
The projector thing.
And when I say style over substance, I'm mainly talking about the fact that almost every attack produces a full screen flash. Like, why?
Again, I do recommend, if you want to.
Why did you do that?
There's a ROM hack that actually does remove that at the very least.
Well, I probably should have figured that, but it would be nice to have it in an official capacity
that is true.
A bunch of nice little off buttons in a menu, maybe.
Yeah.
No, I actually thought this was a lot of fun, like, despite how heavily flawed it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dej.
Honestly, I didn't think we'd get this far. This is a very interesting game. To see what was achieved on the PS1, especially a year after FF7, is incredibly impressive. For all its flaws, you cannot deny that they put a lot of effort into this game.
Yeah, it really just brings me back to my question on, what if this had been the actual Final Fantasy VII? Because this originally was supposed to be Final Fantasy VII.
Well, the original pitch at the very least. Honestly, I think I mentioned this to you. I don't really think stylized, in terms of presentation, yes, because as I mentioned multiple times, Final Fantasy striving for more photorealism has been a mistake. Going for a direction similar to the Tales of franchise should have been the way to go, and this might have been a good opportunity to it instead.
Well, better yet, though, my main question is: do you think that this would have accomplished the feat that Final Fantasy VII did? That be literally save all of Squaresoft from oblivion.
No. I'm not really that delusional on that front, to be honest. For as much as I love every day for this game, on a presentation capacity, it probably wouldn't be felt very impressive, especially because at the time, remember, for outdated VR to this very day, the polygons and the pre-rendered backgrounds back then were seen as mind-breaking for people, including me. Again, I have no problems in admitting that as someone who really grew up with that game, since back then I only had the capacity of mostly Disney licensed IPs, Disney licensed games, seeing something like Final Fantasy VII was literally mind-shattering for me. So I can tell you that it did the job it was supposed to do, and probably this would have not, on a presentation level, mind you, regardless of how the story would have turned out to be. Mm-hmm. But to continue
not to mention the story of this one, I will argue is a bit okay. Let me see if I can phrase this correctly.
Controversial?
No, it's not. Okay. As in, like, it doesn't have the same wide appeal, I will argue, because this involves a lot more of an investment and commitment and patience, like Jova said, whereas 7 is an overall much easier to get into kind of experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Better pace. It has, I'd argue, better story plotting in that regard. Like, again, even without the trouble development, I do feel like the story of this game can occasionally lose focus of the plot in some cases.
Yeah, on the technical force, it's like, I'm impressed. This game needs a remake, not a remaster, a full-on remake, just because of that. Just to you can say, like, yeah, we had some cutbacks. I was like, oh.
Yeah. Like, Legend of Mana, I get getting a remaster, because despite my problems with that game, it's still overall, it's good, and it's fun.
Like you said, as someone who's enjoyed it, I do believe some way of tracking down properly your quest still would have been a decent quality of life improvement.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I say that. So keep in mind, I think that's a thing that needed to be counted. But continue.
Okay, thanks.
What else?
Well, what's your favorite character, for example, while we're at it?
Shiten.
Well, fair enough. Actually, there is something that I haven't asked. I probably should have asked Dweebs as well, but I think he did mention. But how do you think Faye and Ellie's love story is handled in this?
Honestly, as repetitive as Ellie getting captured is, it's like, God, come on. I actually like this love story.
What about you, Jova?
I thought it was charming overall. And it has a good enough conclusion, like, I was so fearful they're gonna do the thing where Ellie chooses to sacrifice herself. Faye is sad, or worse, Ellie and Faye choose to die together, and thus the cycle repeats again.
It's okay, Joe. You can talk about Voltron.
Actually, I have no idea. Again, I only heard Voltron from the Deadpool movie, so I have no idea what it's about and everything. But actually, Jova, you guys have been... I tried to actually guess at the foreshadowing of the game of Faye all committing an ultimate sacrifice for the benefit of humanity, but no, it did not happen.
And I'll admit, again, that's part of why I'm cool with the ending, because it didn't go for that typical sad thing, and surprisingly, you see this in a lot of mecha stuff, where the protagonist and or his loved one have to sacrifice themselves for this or that.
And then there's Evangelion who decides, you know what, let's kill everyone, why not?
Yeah, holy cow, Evangelion.
It's okay, they came back.
But, well, okay, that's also digressing. What about you, Shiri? What do you think about the love story while we're at it? Yeah.
It's cute.
Okay. Go on, continue, Dej.
What else? And for this plot, with my limited knowledge of Xenoblade as a franchise, I finally see the correlations. Like the opening of this game with the the ship crash into Earth.
Or the Eldridge.
Yeah, that's Xenoblade Chronicles X.
Keep in mind, Deds, now you can also get what Smash Brothers Ultimate of all things was referencing in Pyronifus color set.
That still is a point. Xenoblade X borrows a lot of elements from this as well.
Especially the plot. I won't go into detail, but the plot twist with the humans aren't really humans. Yeah, they kind of do that with X as well, something like that.
Yeah.
But I won't go into detail.
But what about the music, Dad? You weren't here for part 2, so I strongly recommend you to actually check that one out so you get the full explanation of what I was referring to the boss theme.
I need to sit down and listen to it because we were... I kept my volume low for most of the Let's Play.
Sure, don't worry.
This game is utter, like I do want to play it because again I really like all the characters. There are some missed opportunities as well, like when with Ramses being set up as to be your 6th Ranger, and it's like it's like, oh come on.
Yeah, that would have really been nice to also see Ramses stick it to both Myung and Crowley in that way.
And the Ministry is like, you guys are disappointing.
Again, okay, I didn't mention it, but when the first time I played, when I saw Ramsus killing Kuryan and Yang like that, I was actually wondering if he was gonna become the real villain.
That's what I thought.
That could have been interesting.
But surprising, kind of like Kylo Ren when you get down to it. But I don't want to digress on that front either too much. So go on, Dej.
Yeah, this. I'm very impressed with what was achieved, and I'm very grateful that we have Xenoblade because now Takahashi's vision can be finally realized.
Again, and it seems that, this is just speculation, audience, because it's only still a matter of time before it gets released, but it's hinting that Xenoblade 3 seems to be a culmination of the previous 2 Xenoblades, so we need to know what the fuck is going on, considering how relatively separated the 2 titles have been, aside from one specific thing that they have in common.
And how they each ended on relatively peaceful notes, but now everything's gone to pot.
Although the funny thing is, they've had the plot for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 since before they developed 2.
To be fair, again, that's peak Takahashi, like he said, the planning an entire saga and then deciding which episode to do it. So, but again, that's literally just speculation. You're done, Dej?
Yeah. Overall, this was a very fun Let's Play, and thank you for inviting me.
Pedro.
Okay. for a lot of reasons that has already been mentioned, yeah, this game is kind of a mixed bag. You know, pretty much the definition of one. There's a lot of good stuff in here, but there's also quite a lot of stuff that's baffling and sometimes outright bad. To add my having doing something I didn't get to answer before. Yeah, I actually find the romance really good for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It is. I will agree that just because you're a capable warrior, that doesn't mean you should be invincible, and therefore that doesn't mean you should never have a character like that be kidnapped / taken down / whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Again, same thing with it's kind of like how Tani in Inokuni 2 gets kidnapped by the wyverns, even though she's a capable warrior, because again she was outnumbered. So that being said, yeah, she gets kidnapped a bit too often and too many times. It gets to a point where it just becomes a bit ridiculous.
We also notice some outdated dialogue a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, if she got to do more to balance this stuff out, that would be fine, but I don't feel like she got to do enough to balance out the fact that she does, in fact, get captured and incapacitated a lot. Like, the only way it could have been worse is if they do the typical female incapacitation grab hold area. The arm.
For me, it's just like, yeah, it is true that she probably could have been a bit more on screen during the first, third of the game. But at the same time, I feel like when she does properly join the party for good, I think she has a good amount of screen time to really, go through her stuff. I think it's fine. It could have been better, but I think the way it is works fine enough still. I actually really enjoyed most of the villains, to be honest. Not because they're like super complex characters, but because they're really enjoyable villains. My favorite being Krellian because because I absolutely love his liquid snake energy. You can look forward to that soon, Shiro, by the way. The basic point is, yeah, I enjoy the villains. I enjoy the characters for the most part, although, yes, some are better developed than others. Faye is really a really good protagonist for what he is. Like I said, I like Elliot fine. Bart is fine. But I feel like, okay, when we're going through his stuff, his personal story, yeah, it's pretty good. I don't think the game focuses on him as much as it should. Okay, let me put it this way. I feel like there's a bit of a lack of balance between character focus because, yeah, this is where you can tell that the game didn't have to cram so much into just one game, because as a result, pretty much only Faye and Ellie get properly fully fleshed out, with Bart being a close third.
Yeah.
Because aside from Ellie and Faye, and to a lesser extent Bart, most of the characters don't really get properly realized arcs. Like look at Cheetan, for example. Cheetan is just kind of enjoying the ride for the most part. He doesn't really have much going on as character wise. I mean, he's just kind of being there most of the time. He's just there for exposition purposes. I mean, that being said, what he lacks in a character arc, he makes up in personality, because yeah, Cheetan is by far one of the most memorable things about this game. I don't think it's for the reasons Takahashi intended, but yeah, he's definitely he definitely makes an impression on you. I'll give him that. Yeah, basically, Cheetan is hilarious and incredibly charming for all the wrong reasons, and I can't help but love him. Not for the reasons the story intended, but I guess I won't turn down a give horse in the mouth, I guess.
Would you say that he's good enough that if you had to pick some character to represent this game, Cheetan would be a contender?
No, okay. In terms of representing this game, I would pick both Ellie and Faye because they're the thematic embodiment of the game. But yeah, I will. But in terms of which one is the most fun, no, definitely Cheetan, because no dull moment with Cheetan, that's for sure.
Damn straight.
Okay. Aside from that, yeah, that's where all the memorable characters really end. Rico, as I've joked various times throughout this playthrough, he has a he has an interesting idea for a character arc at the beginning, but then the game just completely basically forgets that he even exists.
It literally got to a point where we were going, "Oh my God, Rico's still here. He exists.
I'm still in the game."
Oh God, I got a line.
Rico,
Yeah.
Rico. Yeah, he pretty much stops being a character altogether at one point.
Which is really
And-
jarring when he had a big character moment suggesting that he was the illegitimate son of the Kaiser, and then nothing.
Again, deleted plot. His character arc was basically mostly deleted because, well, gotta cut some stuff because we can't do the entire story we've intended, so we have to cram as much as we can in this one game.
Yeah, this game feels like it definitely needs a remake for part of the same reason that Crash to Insanity needs a remake. The cut content.
Maria is just kind of. I mean, she's cute, but and she has a lot of potential. The problem is that they don't the character arc that she has is rushed, and again, after her character arc is done, she pretty much becomes another spectator. Bart is one of those cases where he has a really good character arc, and we do explore a lot of him. Problem is, by the time we get to the final fourth of the game, he pretty much just kind of is also much like he's kind of just going along for the ride at that point. Like his internal struggles basically stop being relevant, and we focus entirely and purely on Ellie and Faye and Krellian, and that's basically it. And Bart at that point just becomes a guy who goes along for the ride, much like Cheaton. That's the reason why I feel like he could have been handled better as well. Oh, Billy. He's okay, I guess. It's just that, but yeah, the fact that I even forgot him pretty much tells you everything. I mean, he doesn't really give him the adventures. There's a good potential arc for him about him, being devoted to this religion and now realizing that your religion is a lie and blah blah blah. Your entire purpose and blah blah was destroyed and everything I've believed in was a lie all along. That's a good potential for a character arc, but the game doesn't really go that deep into it. In fact, Billy doesn't seem to be all that affected by it, to be honest with you. He just kind of he takes it pretty well, all things considered. I mean, you'd think he would have a moment where he would be having some kind of existential crisis or something, but not really. He has a basic reaction when it happens, but after that, yeah, he basically just he gets over it, really. And it's just I mean, you can make an argument maybe he's a really, really mentally strong person, but that doesn't really lead to very interesting storytelling. Yeah. Yeah. Aside from Billy, who I like. That's the thing with Emeralda. She's cute when she's a child, and when she's a grown up, she's just there. She doesn't really do much. We have that thing with the Faye is Kim is Faye, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I felt like it's interesting. I always felt like I personally wouldn't have turned her into an adult if I was writing this. I feel like it would have made the ending more satisfying. Then again, the ending was clearly rushed because we don't even have a "Where are they now?" sequence like we usually do in JRPGs. He saves Ellie, he gets back, and then cut to credits.
We do know that thanks to the feat of Deus, also thanks to one shot that sees the world, not anymore in the state of terraforming, things can actually progress smoothly for humanity. That despite being reduced in numbers, they can start finally again.
I can get where Pedro's coming from, though. It's well, it would have been nice if we got to see more, see them actually just happy.
This is trying to do the same thing, like I said, that Final Fantasy 7 did, just without the ambiguity.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, with 7, we can tell it's made from it. Not to mention, 7 does have the after credit sequence, which kind of gives you a bit of you can basically guess from this scene why that things probably went not too bad, at least. Now, the cutting to credits here doesn't feel intentional. It feels like they ran out of money and time, so they just had to cut it off here. That's what it feels like. I felt like Emeralda was going to be, an adopted daughter for Ellie and Faye. You could have a little scene of them living together. I don't really understand what was the purpose of turning her into an adult. It's not like...
I suppose
Again,
the
it
idea
has
is to show that she has matured and doesn't need an adult anymore, but honestly,
Not
I kind of...
necessarily.
And that would be fine if she had a character arc, but she doesn't.
What do you
Again,
think, Tio?
she was supposed to, but unfortunately they had to condense everything into a side mission.
You can basically apply that to most of the problems that I'm mentioning here. But as is, yeah, like... Okay. She doesn't have a character arc. See, here's the thing. When Cecil turns into a paladin, it's more than just a job switch. It's symbolic of his transformation as a person. He's completely reformed as a person. Esmeralda's transformation here, like, again, the way the story presented happens pretty much randomly and is almost immediately ignored after it happens. Like, we never address it.
Not helped by the fact that it's an optional scene you can get.
And Ellie, like, we never see Ellie's reaction to it. We never see... Hell, I think Faye was the only one that reacted to it.
Yeah,
I think about it.
the only person in
so,
the scene.
So to be fair, Ellie was captured by Deus at that point, so that's why she was
saying that at that point, yeah.
Yeah. It's just that, like, Emeralda feels like an afterthought in the final product. Yeah, and yes, I know it's because of, cut shit, but yeah, well, yeah, aside from that, any more characters that I missed?
Choo Choo?
Choo Choo.
Your own beloved
Choo-Choo.
Joy and Bundle that you voiced.
Yeah, how can you forget about her?
She's fun, I guess. Okay, in terms of comedy relief characters in these JRPGs, she's fine. I've seen worse. I mean...
Scribbler of the year.
Okay, aside from that, you guys should have played the early Shining Force title. Those tend to have very stupid joke characters.
Yeah, no. As far as joke characters go, she's fine. I've seen way worse than this.
She gets the job done.
Yeah, she provides levity, it's fine. And she has the occasional moment here and there, so fine. No harm, no foul. Yeah. As for the story itself is... The pacing is all over the place. Like Jova said, when we get to disc 2, the game puts the pedal to the metal.
Yeah.
And goes super fucking fast. Because, again, we have to cram all this stuff in because we can't make this into a trilogy, so cram everything in Indigo Prophecy style. Although, yeah, because, again, the pacing, in fact, and don't get me wrong, obviously this is still a much better executed stuff because Takahashi can actually write, unlike David Cage. But yeah, the pacing feels very similar to Indigo Prophecy. In the sense that it starts off slow because it feels like it's building up to stuff. Because remember, Indigo Prophecy was also originally going to be a trilogy. But then later they realized, oh shit, we're not going to be able to do the trilogy. Quick! Fast, cram everything into it.
Even more than that, Pedro. Remember, this was supposed to be an hexalogy.
Yeah, that's true. An hexalogy, yeah, no. And you can definitely tell that they had to cut shit. But the shit that a lot of the stuff that's left in is rushed. Yeah, that it's noticeable. Okay, let me put it this way. Takahashi did do reasonably well considering the problems that he faced while making this game, but at the same time I feel like there were some aspects that he probably could have handled a bit better. Like, okay, if you can't do the 6 games all together, you need to start making some serious cuts. Yeah, I know that you've already made some, but I feel like you should have cut down even more. The time we spent dealing with Rico's character arc that you're never going to be able to finish anyway, you might as well cut Rico from the game altogether at this point.
And again, just replace him with Margie, who, may I remind you, does show up in the final FMV cutscene anyway.
That would have been my decision if I was the producer of this game. My suggestion to Takashi would have been, okay, if we're not going to be able to finish Rico's character arc anyway, there's no point in leaving this in. Let's just cut Rico altogether and put Margie or some other character in his or her place, because someone who has a simpler character that can be taken care of in a short amount of time, because we're not going to be able to finish Rico, so might as well cut Rico from the game altogether.
I would have either replaced him with Margie, or I would have had Emeralda take up his screen time so that she could actually get more time playable.
I also think they should have cut down on some of try to make the world and the overall lore a simplifying it a bit more, so you can flesh out what you have instead of just having a shit ton of stuff, but none of it is properly fleshed out. Because again, we have to rush for most of this stuff and cut stuff. Even if we were rushing, we still have to cut stuff. So I feel like when he realized he couldn't have made 6 games, he should have rethought the entire thing and just, okay, I need to make some serious cuts. I need to simplify and streamline this entire thing to a more, yes, probably wouldn't have been, okay, you can argue it would have made the story less interesting in comparison, but at the same time, I feel like this game would have been an overall better made game if it was streamlined. It really needed a serious streamlining process, because because there's so many moments in this game where you can tell something is rushed, you can tell when something was cut from the all entirely, and it creates a feeling of unsatisfaction when you notice those, because it's so noticeable. So yeah. This shit should have been streamlined. That's the basic problem. That being said, there's still quite a lot of good things here. I really like the themes it tackles, and I like and the characters that are properly fleshed out are really enjoyable. And well, the commentary is good. The character interactions are pretty enjoyable. So yeah. It's a very flawed game, but the talent on display is undeniable, and you can tell that there was a lot of effort and care put into this. So and it's still really enjoyable for what it is. The music, yeah, Mitsuda is of course a legend, but it's pretty good. It's a pretty good soundtrack, not on par with something like Chrono Trigger, but still pretty good for what it is. And the graphics are pretty damn good, I have to say. I also applaud the game for tackling all of these issues that most video games at the time wouldn't even dare touch. So that's cool for that. I also I'm still baffled that somehow this game managed to get past the Western censors with a nipple being shown on screen.
Giggity.
It helps that it was a pixel, I guess.
I mean, today this is no big deal. There's plenty of games with nudity nowadays, but back in 1998, this was a big no-no.
What was the game's rating?
I don't know.
Was it T?
M? Probably.
Let me check.
I don't know. Remember, well, that this never came out in Europe, so it doesn't have a PEGI.
It was rated T13.
Okay. Outside of of what Pedro said, there are the sequences, in which character stands naked, even if there's censorship. Whereas clearly, there are a lot of moments of maturity. A T rating feels inadequate still.
My guess is that the reason is that we never see any genitalia. Seeing the genitalia is usually what pushes things up into the end.
I think I understand that. I do believe he deserved it, not necessarily for what it showed, but for how cerebral it gets, on a plot level.
Sure. So, yeah, that being said, it's a pretty good-looking game for its time. So yeah, it's pretty good for what it is. It's a very flawed game, but yeah, what works really works, and it's an overall really enjoyable. That being said, yeah, I will agree that the pacing needs some serious work as well, because like Jova said, yeah, there were quite a lot of bits in disc 1, especially towards the beginning, where the game feels like it's spinning its wheels a bit, and yeah, there were quite a lot of plot threads that probably should have been deleted altogether too, so we can properly flesh out the things that matter the most.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the entirety of Rico should have been cut altogether. If you're not going to be able to properly give this character justice, why even bother? Let's just cut him altogether.
Because they really liked his design.
And yes, I like Blanca too. But if you're
That's nice, I guess, but
if you're not going to do some amazing things with him, though,
yeah,
what is the point?
It says a lot that he was in the Final Fantasy mobile game instead of
that is also well. Actually, remember that the entire playable party is in that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, plus Graf and Id, but it
was just like Faye, Bart, Ellie, Emeralda, and Blanca. were announced on the same time. So it's just like,
Yeah.
But again, just give me a second, Pedro. This is a good way to attach because there are two small things that I did not mention in terms of Square remembering this game very quickly. Avatars of Faye and Bart in 2017 were actually cosmetics in one Japanese exclusive Square game called Figureheads. And in 2018, in order to celebrate the game's 20th anniversary, Kunihiko Tanaka and Juya Ishigaki, the original character designers, collaborated with Square Enix to release a couple of action figures of Faye, Ellie, and Veltal. So again, Square is still remembering this game in some kind of fashion at the very least.
yeah, that's nice.
But yeah, the pacing is a big problem because again, there's never any middle ground. It's either on full throttle or just complete molasses. It really is a problem. Like for example, like I said, and sometimes you can literally feel the developers rushing through stuff, like because it's like I said, the moment where both of Ellie's parents get killed, one after the other, like we barely get any time to properly react to one of the parents getting killed.
And by Hammer, no less. Oh wait, sorry. No,
yeah.
The dad wasn't killed by Hammer, but still though.
And right after one of them dies, immediately the other one starts dying too, and I'm just like, okay, calm down, game. Let's give some time for the first F to breathe and the audience to absorb it. Not to mention for Ellie to have a proper reaction to it. It felt like, it was so fast, and we barely got any time to properly digest it, and that was naff right there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can. I'm in agreement. This game desperately needs a full-blown remake. Not necessarily like a full-scale AAA one. You can if you can find a developer like M2, because remember they recently did the Legend of Mana one. If M2 is able to take the game and properly work with the existing assets. And if they can somehow get Takahashi involved to supervise, maybe, or maybe
like you said, I don't know if M2 was the one involved, but again, Saga Frontier, the first Saga Frontier game, basically went through this. It had a lot of cut content, and one managing to implement all of it. The master managed to incorporate most of what it was.
Sure, yeah, definitely. Definitely, a Saga Frontier's treatment is definitely what this game desperately needs. Again, I don't know if Nintendo is willing to allow Takahashi to, at the very least, supervise. Maybe. Hopefully they are.
There is this, Pedro. If you notice, between the Bravely games and the upcoming Live Alive remake, it seems that there is some minor implicit partnership with some Square games that Square doesn't seem to care in publishing the West. Lets Nintendo do it. So even if it was like a Switch exclusive, I guess it could work.
Can you imagine the irony that's how Takahashi?
Not the first time it happened.
Mm-hmm. It all depends on whether or not Square still has the original script still somewhere in there.
I feel like this is one of those cases where even if they didn't, Nintendo has the original man himself who... I'd be willing to bet he'd be just enough a madman to be able to pull it off.
I can tell this because he mentioned interviews. He mentioned interviews that one, he would love to come back to Xenosaga. Xenosaga itself is something that both him and his wife kind of feels kind of like of an old shame in terms of what he did, but he never expressed the same sentiment for this game. So he leaves it open on that front.
Yeah, the basic point is it's literally a mixed bag. There's a lot of good stuff here, but there's also quite a lot of baffling and outright bad stuff to it as well. So yeah. That being said, I will argue the game is still an overall entertaining mess for what it is. So yeah, it's really enjoyable. That being said, I can also understand some people being frustrated because the game is very, very much of a mess when it comes to the actual construction, how it was put together, because the pacing is all over the place. So that's basically it. Yeah, but still enjoyable. All right.
That's what you wanted to say.
Oh yeah, so I knew about the reincarnation plot twist for years because some dumbass on YouTube just casually spoils it when doing a top 10 list of best RPGs on the PS1.
Classic.
Oh, wait, hold on. In terms of spoiling, was it him explaining it, or was he just doing it to be a dick?
He was just casually talking about how great this game is. Talks about Faye and how he was just a reincarnation and whatnot. And it's just like, oh, that's interesting.
Did he give?
And then when Tio was playing this, I was like, wait a minute, this was supposed to be a major plot twist, wasn't it?
So did he at least give like spoiler warnings for the video?
No.
Okay, that's awkward.
Yeah. I guess it's because it's one of those, well, the game came out 20 years ago, so no one cares.
On that front, I can understand, but this game still has a fair amount of obscurity, on its own. So I'm considering it bad. Again, in general, remember that it's the same thing that happens with that spoiler character in the first Xenoblade, where the fans try to keep the mystery going on, but Nintendo itself doesn't give a shit in spoiling the shit out of it.
And then, the guys did it again with Xenoblade Chronicles 2 when explaining the characters for Smash. Right down to spoiling, that character. Oh, sure, yeah, they tried to blur it out, but come on, at that point, it was so obvious.
It's almost comic. It's almost comical. But anyway, that leaves finally me. Okay, again, I could say many things, and I probably still will, but like he said at the very beginning, after replaying this a second time, I gotta be honest, I can't help but being basically in love with this for one reason or another. Warts and all, gotta be honest. Not just what it could have been, but even its final product. Mostly due to how intelligent it feels. Even with its most dumb moments, it feels there's a genuine passion and consciousness in writing the script of this, crafting this fictional world that is still relatively close to us, and just being in the character's shoes and piecing together the mystery and realizing that the solution could have been at hand all the time, but sadly, because of unlucky coincidences, the main characters were just basically led astray, and unfortunately, the villains were having the upper hand for most of the time. Which, like I said, as a sentiment will be reflected in, for example, the Namco Cross Capcom and Project Growth Zone games, interestingly enough. So again, not just through the other Xeno titles, but in general, this game is the basis of a huge legacy that lives on to this very day. And it's important to understand also this. But it's still, unfortunately, doesn't change the fact that this being screwed led the final product, the properly released product, to be, indeed, still kind of a mess. In terms of character, I love Faye as a protagonist, no questions asked. I kind of wish he had a weapon instead of being basically a monk. In terms of, combat, a lot of characters don't really have a weapon, like I noticed, and it feels kind of a bit of a shame. It is a bit innovative to have a character that is not your traditional, warrior with sword and shield, admittedly. But maybe he should have had a whip instead of Bart. I get it that it's also thematic for Bart's character, sadly. But I don't know. Faye probably could have worked out even without. I get it also because of maybe of the martial arts, so they at least incorporated that well. So at the very least, there's that commitment. But yeah, I absolutely love the psychological, traumas and reconstruction that this poor person has to deal with. Discovering that he's technically basically 3 years old as a personality and putting the pieces of his very soul together. And discovering that he's basically the Ubermensch destined to lead mankind to greatness and killing God, just like Crap predicted at the beginning. All coming full circle, and the player feels just as empowered as Faye is. And the devs know it because the name is Ultimate Gear. That's the name of the fucking title of the game. So, yeah, you can tell how much they knew. Cheetan is fun to make fun of, but it's still also very interesting to see this figure that's very intelligent. But again, the player knows immediately that something is going on with him, but you cannot understand very much about it. But instead, the characters do not, and you have to see them trying to slowly catch up upon and see what the deal is. Granted, like I said, some of the stuff is just pure dickery, and some is just pure cop-out, but it's still fun on its own to see where it goes through with Cheetan. Ellie, I am fine with Ellie for the most part. Like we mentioned, some stuff is a bit outdated, and I kind of wish. I think Jova mentioned, or Jova or Dweebs mentioned that she.
I just remembered too. You speaking about the outdated stuff. How about the fact that Ellie asks Faye not to? Are you going to stay here and watch? Oh, sorry, no. And then she goes out there and not only watches Faye in the shower, but even lies like, "Oh, I'm adjusting the temperature." Yeah, fuck off. You're not adjusting any temperature. That shit is inside the shower.
No. She's adjusting the temperature, but it ain't of the room. No. She's adjusting some internal temperature of her own, letting off some steam.
Okay. If there's one... sorry, go on, too. I can finish in a moment.
No, go on.
Okay. Now, if there's one thing I fucking hate in stories, media, and all that stuff, it's double fucking standards. It drives me the fucking wall. I hate that shit. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to crap on the game just because of that one moment. It's just that it drives me the fucking wall. Sure knows what I mean because we were watching NFN E. I hate fucking double standards. To give you an idea, in that show, there's girls claiming quote-unquote dibs on boys. But if those genders were reversed, yeah, we all know what people would have said. Just saying. But I fucking hate double standards. I fucking hate that shit.
As I mentioned when the scene happened, and in general for other occasions, I do believe that there is a sort of a compensation, not necessarily for that scene alone, but in a general sense, in a sense that Faye and Ellie do complement each other in kind of way. They are both dorks in some kind of ways. One may have some quirkiness type that the other maybe lacks, but in doing so complement each other, which, I mean, it's ingrained in their fucking DNA. Yes, that's practically easy mode on that. Could have been conveyed potentially a bit better, but I do not mind some of the stuff that happened because, like I said, I do believe that there is some form of rebalancing as the game goes along. Less much so, some of the phrases like we did notice about Ellie mentioned about women being selfish. Again, I do wonder if it was one, a case of potentially Richard not knowing how to translate it properly and just deciding to do that, and/or two, the situation. Having Ellie saying something desperate, and potentially having, being the setting that there was there being the logical thing that she could say at that point. But then again, on the same token, as a writer, you could rework it so that she can say the same thing, just in a different way that doesn't sound like that.
Given how things in Japan can be a bit more sexist, if we were to blame Richard, I'd only blame him for not coming up with something better. Otherwise, his mentality for most of this localization just seems to be, let's just try and get this through the most simple way possible so I can get done with this and go see my family again. But, okay, I mean, look, all joking aside, I would sooner believe that was how it was written in the original script, because it matches up with a lot of scripts we've seen from Japanese writers. Not going to say like all Japanese writers are like them. But if Takashi is also behind all the other Xeno stuff, then, well, yeah, there is kind of a consistency with that stuff.
Where was I? Right. As such, I do again, you know how I feel usually about how tumoric a lot of love stories feels in medias, including video games. So believe me when I say this, but I find this one of the best love stories in a video game that I ever seen. These two lovers that meet originally casually, but as the game progresses, finds that they keep having something in common. They're literally reunited and torn apart by war multiple times, and they ultimately discover that the love was their love was basically not destined, but something that they tried to accomplish for a very long time, and fate time and time again and tried to separate them, and ultimately instead they can finally live together. It's very cute on that kind of way, much more than I can say from what Square was trying to do with other properties like Final Fantasy VIII, unfortunately. Again, this completely takes a big fatty fucking dump on Squall and Rinoa, and I will never go back on this. Trust me on that. But anyway, for the rest of the characters, Bart is probably the one that is developed the most. I like him. Very, very prototype Zeke. And and again, despite his boisterous maneuvers, he acts as a good friend to Faye, but he's showcased to have weaknesses on his own, insecurities and such. And as such, he's very, developed overall. Sure, his character arc stops kind of like at the 2/3 mark of this one, but I do believe it's not that different from, say, what happened in Final Fantasy VII when one character like Barret or Red 13 have their story arc completed and then they still hang around with the party. Nothing too different from that. It's just that, if anything, I kind of like the fact that his story arc gets put on pause, at the end of Act 1 and gets reprised at the end of Act 3, basically. And almost to the beginning of Act 4. It is kind of nice how they pace that, to me. Same goes for the entire crew of Yggdrasil. Even if there might not be super fleshed out like Mason, Sigurd is a bit more, to be honest. But sadly, because of the circumstances with the war, we never get to see what would have been the Republic or the monarchy that Bart wanted to establish in Ave, alas. But still nice. Rico. Again, I really wanted to like Rico, but it is true that his presence feels minimal. I don't think it's so detrimental, but it does feel more bragging rights. I wouldn't want to cut him away anyway, because I do believe it is important for maintaining like one person from Ave and one person for Kislev. Cut Maria if you have to, or replace her with Margie and anything, but give Rico more of that screen time. Again, cutting away his story arc was probably a bad call. I would be willing to sacrifice even Chuchu if it was for the sake of, boosting up Rico if I had to, but, excising me entirely because of his, minimal screen time, no, I disagree completely on that. And that goes for Kislev on its own. Again, the entire equilibrium of the first bit of the game is about these two empires at war. So it is important to see both of them, because otherwise there is kind of a bit of an imbalance on that front. Then Billy. Billy is almost fine, almost the level of Bart, but he lacks that final step, particularly with Jesse, which is admittedly my favorite, non-player good character of a bunch. Again, shame about the fact that, basically their story arc gets dropped after the end of Act 3, but what can you do? Then there's Maria. Yeah, Maria is usually the weakest link, the one that I probably would have cut. The only reason just replace her with Marchi and give to her the Sibes, and again, you can easily make that work around. Chuchu, no, she can just keep her as she is. She's fine, even if her characterization is limited. And then there's Emeralda, the one that also needed to be expanded upon. But we do know that was already planned to begin with, but unfortunately that thing was also excised. And as for the villains, surprised that no one actually has mentioned Id until this point, because gotta be honest, I fucking love Id.
I'll admit, I don't really consider Id a villain, which is why I didn't really mention him. Like, he's technically part of Faye.
When I say Faye, as in the highlight of the game, I'm including everything involving Faye inside his head.
Mm-hmm. Same.
But again, as basically the trope codifier of the psychopathic man-child, he is very enjoyable, and you do feel the imposing nature of him. Every time he shows up on screen, you do shit your pants, because you know that this guy is capable of killing you very easily, so you never know what the situation is going to unfold. And yet, as the time progresses, you see things getting resolved properly. with him, and ultimately Faye reconciling with himself. Same basically kind of goes for Graf. Again, the entire story of Lacan being kept, most of the story of Lacan being kept, manages to make him work out a bit better. Wish we could have seen a bit more of Faye's power, Khan, and how the transformation did happen instead of having some of the stuff being told to us. Again, I like the final part, but I wish there was a bit more on that. Ramsus is also very entertaining to see what he starts as the stoic commander figure that you really wish to see how he was going, but then almost immediately his personality starts to crumble and becoming, in-universe more deranged as the game goes on, and this connects to Miang. You do wonder why she seems to be so passive towards Ramsus' behavior, almost as if, she doesn't care. Instead, she knows everything, and she just so despicable. Jonah put a good comparison with Azula, with loving to hate on that front, because again, the shit when Miang basically gets away with until the very end of the game is so inhumane and intentionally so, which is connected to the theme as on large. I do not really have a problem with this game talking about the themes. They are very uncomfortable. They will literally get under your skin. Again, child abuse and blatantly talking about, corrupt religion in its worst aspect. Like I said, however, the game was made during the time where the scandals of the Catholic Church were on full display on the news. So if anything, they were literally just capitalizing on a real-life event. And it's still done in a kind of an intelligent way where it has a focus on it. It's not there just for the sake of either shock value or because they want to potentially score some extra, brownie points in saying, "Oh, we look so cool because we're talking about this." No, there is still a purpose to the story properly. One that does not pisses off the people usually who play it. Again, for the most part, there is the whole thing with the translators, but that was mostly again out of principle. Because I do believe, again, anyone with some religious background could still understand this kind of game, especially because at the end of the day, it's still a fictional product. It is, if you really think this thing is actually criticizing this thing, I do feel sorry. And I do wonder if you actually were one of those people in the mid-2000s who thought that the Da Vinci Code was going to be the end times. But again, I guess that's what I love about Miang, the fact that she's so despicable. And you actually do get to beat her up. Yes, there's a bit of a lack of catharsis factor on here, but at least it's there. Much less so with Krelian. If there's anything that I actually genuinely agree that is the low point probably to me, probably of the game, is the fact that Krelian, like I said, gets away with everything and doesn't get confronted properly. You do know what I think about villains getting comeuppance, and this is no exception. Like, at least one boss fight would have been that too hard to ask. No, even his own Omnigear, the Amphisbena, he lets Ramsus borrow it. Like, you never get to fight. Not even a case where you fight him and then he gets up because of another machine. No, you never get to physically assault this guy. He's literally the quintessential video game karma Houdini. And again, I wouldn't have minded the idea of him coming to a realization after merging with the Wave existence and then ultimately deciding to fuck off for exile rather than having to, potentially damaging more the people on the planet.
If we at least got to fight him.
Sorry?
If we at least got to fight him.
Potentially even that on that front. But again, it really does feel like he did too much shit for him to actually be allowed to do this kind of thing. And that I will still agree upon.
I think what hurts especially is that he gets to call the shots on it. Like, it's not even about Faye and Ellie letting him go. It's just like, no, he gets to choose to do that.
That is the thing. That's a good observation, Jola. Throughout the entire game, you can see that Krelian is always in control of the situation. No matter what's happening, everything is still going accordingly to his plans. Like, There's never a situation where you get to see him break up. The closest we got was his flashbacks, because that was the entire catalyst of him, Anyway, I get the idea why he's the pet character, because it names up also the entire thing of him creating, quote unquote, Deus in a sense of resurrecting him and creating him as a god. He labels it Project Noah, which was supposed to be the original title of this game. So I do wonder.
So
but
it
anyway,
makes you wonder if this is actually the story of Krellian, wanting to make.
Disguise.
He just wanted to make this game, but Square messed with his creation, and it drove him to madness.
Anyway, the rest of the minor villains, like Shakan, Vanderkom, and Bishop Stone, are also good arc villains of their own respective story arcs. Maybe Bishop Stone could have been developed a bit more before the shoe was dropped on that front, but I am fine with what they did. Who else?
Well, I guess, the Gazelle Ministry.
Right. Well, it's the same what you said, Jova. I like them, but I kind of wish we got a boss fight against them as well. I think there was the perfect opportunity right after Faye and the others got free from captivity before they were able to escape Solaris. So, I don't think there was any particular foul in having a boss fight with that and saying, oh, we managed only to stun them, now we have a chance to move. No, something like that. I don't know. It feels a bit wasted on that front. Even the fact that, again, Emperor Kane is fine, but also I wish not only Cheetan would have been able to want to interact with him. Again, he never even speaks to Faye directly on that, even though he regards him so much about being, the reincarnation of the Contact, the person that, he fucking killed.
Bit weird, isn't it?
But yeah, I'm sure I'm still forgetting something, but otherwise...
Well, I guess there is also the bad guy who was in charge of Bart and Margie's kingdom.
Shakan, I already mentioned about him. But as for everything else, presentation, love it. This pixel art is it's fine. Could have been a bit better, kind of like the Mega Man X games. But as it is, it's also impressive how the polygons and the sprites are, intelligently mixed into creating this engine that doesn't have to rely on FMVs, and instead also has potentially aged also a bit better than a lot of PS1 games. But the music also I really like. Overall, for the most part, again, Chrono Trigger, as Pedro said, is probably a better score from Mitsuda, but this one is also fine. I still have to wonder what the fuck was up with the boss theme lyrics, but that was something that probably we will never know. Who knows? And I think that's pretty much it. It has been a journey, admittedly, both for recording and actually commenting on that. I think this experiment overall was a bit more successful than Legend of Mana. Like I said, I want to see this game being re-released, but a simple conversion will not cut it. But at the same time, I do not want like a AAA full-on remake like the Final Fantasy 7 is getting. Again, a decent nice middle ground like Saga Frontier 1, or like I just said, something like Live Alive.
I'm curious. Sorry, if I may ask, practicality aside, why don't you want a big budget remake of this?
Too much time consuming, and a lot of potential for adding or screwing things up, perfectly good things already existing. Simple as that. If such a thing has happened, again, as also Shire mentioned, quality of life improvements of any kind, of the most kind that you can find, adjustable font size, better translation overall across the board, removal of the flashing lights, or at least toggle them. I do believe removing them will not really harm the product, as it's just a visual thing. Potentially a speed up booster. I don't have a problem with that. It makes things more smoother without having to harm the experience. And again, just re-implement as much cut content as you can. That's really the biggest thing that this game needs, to be honest. Just a simple re-release similar to the PlayStation Network one, sadly, will not gonna cut it. But that's pretty much it. Again, been a journey. Overall, consider this experiment a success. And see, apparently it's gonna be a long time before Action actually records something long for us. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So we might see you eventually for Xenoblade in 2030. Who the fuck knows? See ya.
That's too generous. Come on, 2025. Let's go.